Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 5 terrifying experiences in abandoned cemeteries. Real horror tales. We return to places most people avoid. Forgotten graveyards where the world feels quieter, the air heavier, and the shadows a little too aware of you. These are stories buried in cracked stone and sunken soil. Stories that never fully died. Every experience you're about to hear comes from real people who stepped onto these abandoned cemeteries and walked away with the feeling that something underneath was watching them. My goal this month is to reach 4,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers listen and disappear without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe when you're ready. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if your town has a cemetery or a forgotten corner that gives you a bad feeling, write its name below. Because when the world sleeps and the earth settles, some things beneath it never rest. Turn off the lights, stay quiet, take a slow breath, and let's begin. If you want it shorter, darker, or more dramatic, just tell me. My name is Caleb, and I'm from Stillwater, Minnesota. I've lived here most of my life, so I'm used to people romanticizing the town. The old brick downtown, the river, the lift bridge, the antique shops. People drive in on weekends, take pictures, eat ice cream, and then go back to the suburbs. For me, it's just where I buy laundry detergent and stand in line at the bank. Right now, I rent the bottom half of a divided old house a few blocks off Main. It's one of those tall, narrow places with creaky floors and thin walls where you can hear the neighbor's TV through the vents if you listen for it. My younger sister, Lauren, moved in with me a little over a year ago when she left a bad relationship. We split the rent, fight over cabinet space, and argue about whose turn it is to take the trash out. Pretty normal. I work as a medical billing clerk for the clinic on the edge of town. It's about as exciting as it sounds. I stare at screens, correct codes, call insurance companies, and drink too much coffee. 3 days a week, I go into the office. 2 days, I work from home at a little desk in the front room by the window. The window faces the street, which sounds nice, but the real view is straight across from us, the cemetery. It's not a big cemetery, pocket-sized, really. If you're standing on my porch, it looks kind of like someone carefully set down this little rectangle of history in the wrong century and just left it there. There's a black iron fence around it, not very tall, with a simple gate that squeaks when it opens. You can see over the top of it easily. In the front near the road, the grass is trimmed and neat. A tiny gravel path cutting between the first couple of rows of stones. But further back, it starts to get messy. Bushes push through the rails, ivy creeps up the older stones, and in summer, the weeds come up to your knees. The stones go back to the Victorian era, a lot of dates in the late 1800s and early 1900s, with those long, old-fashioned names you don't really hear anymore. Some are broken, a few are leaning, and there are spots where the ground dips, like the earth forgot how to hold its shape. There's one grave set apart from the rest, off to the right by itself near the fence, like someone dropped it there at the last minute. In the middle of the cemetery, there's this stone bench that faces a particular grave, a taller monument with a carved top. People sit there sometimes and eat lunch or just stare at the names. When we first moved in, I used to stand on the porch in the evenings and just look at it. The cemetery felt peaceful. That's really the only word I have for it. Wind moving through the trees, crows calling from the branches, the sound of tires crunching over the gravel when someone pulled off the road to visit a grave. On warm nights, you could hear chipmunks chattering near the fence, little skittering sounds, and then the quiet when they suddenly stopped. The town's church bells drifted over on Sundays. It was all just background. Lauren took to it faster than I did. She'd lean against the porch railing with her coffee and say things like, "Free neighbors, they never complain about the noise." She works evenings at a bar downtown, so she got used to walking past the cemetery late at night when she came home. She joked that if anything weird ever happened, at least there were no living witnesses. Most days, life was pretty boring. I woke up early, listened to the old house crack and settle, heard the radiator knock in winter. I made oatmeal, scrolled through my phone, drove to work, or logged in from my desk. Evenings were leftovers, Netflix, Lauren running in and out as she got ready for her shift. We got used to the sound of the screen door creaking and slamming, the low hum of cars passing the cemetery, the occasional dog barking somewhere down the block. Just a small town being itself. The first thing I noticed that felt even slightly off was the cemetery gate. It was late September, one of those nights when the air finally tilts toward cold. Lauren was at work, and I was home alone answering emails from a stubborn insurance rep. I got up to refill my coffee and glanced out the front window, just as the motion light on our porch flicked on. It happened sometimes, cats, raccoons, whatever, so I didn't think much of it. But as I looked past the glare of the bulb, I saw the cemetery gate slowly swinging inward. It wasn't a big dramatic thing. The wind wasn't howling. There was just this steady, smooth motion, like someone had pushed it open from the road. It creaked, stopped when it was about halfway open, and stayed that way. I remember standing there and doing that thing where you argue with yourself in your head. The latch is old, maybe it doesn't catch right. Maybe the city didn't close it all the way. Maybe a gust of wind lined up just right. It wasn't a big deal, but it felt wrong somehow. Like when you find your keys somewhere, you're sure you didn't leave them. The next morning, walking to my car, I saw the gate was closed again. The gravel by the entrance looked disturbed, like someone had walked in and out. Small stones shifted, a couple of footprints where the gravel had given way to the dirt beneath. I tried to guess the size. Adult, maybe. Hard to tell. Kids cut through there a lot, and there's a path out the back that leads toward a bike trail, so it made sense. A few nights later, the flowers showed up. I'd never really paid attention to that grave set apart near the fence before. It's not fancy. Medium-sized stone, not too tall, just a smooth gray shape with a last name, 2 first names, and dates. One of those shared stones. I'd read it once in passing, then forgot it. I only noticed it again because from our porch, something bright caught my eye. This little splash of color in all the muted browns and grays. There was a small bouquet of fresh flowers propped against that stone. Real ones, not plastic. White and yellow, wrapped in clear cellophane. The kind you'd grab from the grocery store cooler on the way to a hospital or a birthday dinner. They hadn't been there the day before. Somebody remembered them, Lauren said that evening when she came home and saw me staring. She dropped her bag on the chair and joined me at the window. Kinda sweet, right? Yeah, I said. I just never see anyone over there. Maybe they come when you're busy being an old man on the couch, she said, nudging me with her elbow. That was the tone of those early things. Little, harmless things. I noticed them. I had a thought about them. And then I found a normal reason and let it go. The porch light did its thing again the following week. This time it flicked on around 11 while I was shutting down my laptop. I almost didn't look, but habit made me check. The street was empty. No cars, no people. The only movement I could see was the branches of the maple trees shifting in a light breeze. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The screen door creaked behind me and then clicked softly as it shut. The air had that wet, leafy smell you get in October when the leaves collect and start to break down on the pavement. Across the road, the cemetery was dark. The town doesn't light it. Whatever glow reached it came from our porch light and the occasional passing headlights. I stood there listening. Wind in the trees, a dog barking way off somewhere. The faint hum of a distant train horn. Somewhere to my right, a few leaves scraped along the road, pushed by the breeze. Nothing special. But there was this moment when the insects, crickets or whatever they were, just stopped. The sound cut off so cleanly, it was like someone had hit a mute button. The silence lasted a few long seconds, my breath suddenly too loud in my own ears. Then the chirping started again, like nothing had happened. "Okay," I said out loud, mostly to myself. That was weird. I went back inside, locked the door, and told myself I'd been paying too much attention. A couple of days later, Lauren mentioned the bench. We were eating takeout at the small table by the window. She was halfway through a story about some drunk guy at the bar when she paused and tilted her head, looking past me. "Have you ever seen anybody actually sit on that bench?" she asked. I swallowed a bite of lo mein and turned. The stone bench was right there in the middle of the cemetery, facing that taller monument. In the fading light, you could see the faint outline of the seat, darker in some places where years of rain had stained it. "Yeah," I said. "Sometimes. People eat lunch there. I've seen dog walkers stop and sit. Why?" "I don't know," she said. "I walk past there after work a lot. Late. Sometimes 2, 3 in the morning. I always look, because if somebody was sitting there that time of night, I'd turn right back around and go home. But it always looks like somebody just got up." "What do you mean?" I asked. She shrugged. "You know when someone stands up from a park bench and it's damp, and you can see where they were sitting? Like that. Dry patch or whatever. I don't know. Maybe I'm just tired." "You sure it's not just you?" I said. "You sit down, you stand up, you look back." "Haha," she said. "No. I don't sit on cemetery benches at 3 in the morning, thanks." We laughed it off. That was our pattern. Notice something, make a joke, move on. The thing that really started to bother me was the time. I don't sleep great. I wake up a lot around 2 or 3 for no good reason. Sometimes I go get water. Sometimes I just lie there and stare at the ceiling. You learn the sounds of your house pretty quickly when you're up at those hours. One night in late October, I woke up and checked my phone. 2:13 a.m. I remember that number because when I got up to use the bathroom, the motion light outside my bedroom window flashed through the curtains. It's not the same one as the porch. This is a smaller sensor light over the side door, facing the narrow driveway and the side of the cemetery. I went to the window and moved the curtain just enough to look out. The side yard was empty. The driveway was empty. The fence was a black line against the sky. The light stayed on for a full minute and then clicked off. 3 nights later, I woke up again, checked the time, 2:13 a.m. on the dot. A few seconds after I blinked at the screen, the same white glow pressed against the curtains. The light had gone off by the time I got to the window, but my heart was beating harder than the situation really deserved. I told myself it was a stray cat, or the wind moving something, or the sensor having a glitch. That week at work, I found myself staring at numbers on the screen and thinking about motion lights. My brain kept circling back to it like a dog worrying a sore spot. I finally decided it was stupid to be creeped out by my own lack of data. So on Friday, I stopped by City Hall. There's a little office on the ground floor that handles property records and cemetery plots. It mostly smells like old paper and dust, with a hint of stale coffee. The woman at the desk, Carol, has been there forever, the type who knows everybody's grandparents and all their secrets. "Hey Carol," I said. "We're renting the house across from the cemetery on Oak, and I was just curious about the history of the place. The cemetery, I mean." She glanced up over her readers. "History how?" "I don't know," I said. "Just who's buried there, I guess. Was it always that small?" That sort of thing. She watched me for a second longer, then felt comfortable, then swiveled her chair toward the file cabinets. "It's the old city plot. Some families moved their people when the new cemetery opened off Highway 36. Some didn't. We're not supposed to let the ledgers out, but I can look something up for you if you have a name." I thought of the set-apart grave across from our porch. There's one stone off to the side, by itself, near the fence. Last name is Hargrove, I think." She paused with her hand on a drawer. "You living across from there now?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Lower unit. My sister and I moved in last year." She said. And there was a whole history in that one sound. She opened the drawer, flipped through a couple of folders, then closed it again without taking anything out. "Some of those records are incomplete," she said. "We had a water leak down here years ago, lost a lot of paper. Hargrove, you said?" "Pretty sure," I said. She shook her head. "I wouldn't worry too much about it. Those older plots, nobody's left to come visit. City just mows around them." I almost mentioned the flowers then, but something about her expression made me stop. It wasn't fear. It was more like she'd come to the if something she'd decided not to look over anymore. On my way out, I glanced back and saw her watching me leave, her fingers tapping against the desk in this restless, uneven pattern. After that, the routine felt strained, like a song with one note slightly out of tune. The cemetery was still there, still quiet most of the time, but I found myself checking it more often. I'd stand at the window to take a break from billing codes and pay attention to the little things, the way the gravel path wound through the first rows, the way fallen leaves collected against the iron fence, the way that one solitary grave always seemed to catch the first or last light of the day. The flowers on the Hargrove grave changed. The initial bouquet wilted, went limp, and then, one afternoon, it was gone and replaced by a new one. Different colors this time, pink and white. Again, I hadn't seen anyone deliver them. Our street isn't that busy. If there'd been a car, I probably would have heard it. "Maybe there's a back way in," Lauren said when I brought it up. "Like from the alley or something." "There isn't," I said. "The fence runs all the way around. I've walked it." "Then maybe the flowers grow there," she said, wiggling her fingers like she was telling a ghost story, and then she laughed. One night in November, it snowed for the first time. Not much, just a light dusting, enough to frost the roofs and make the streets look cleaner than they are. The cemetery looked different under snow, sharper somehow, all the edges more defined. You could see small animal tracks winding through the stones, and near the gate, a clear set of footprints leading in. I was standing at the window around 9 p.m., watching the flakes drift under the streetlight, when the porch light switched on. This time, instead of opening the door, I slipped on my boots and my jacket and stepped outside quietly. The cold hit my face straight away, that thin, dry Minnesota cold that goes right into your nose. Our porch steps creaked as I went down them, each one giving a soft complaint. I stood on the sidewalk for a second, listening. No cars, no people. The only sound was the faint hiss of tires somewhere far off on the main road and the soft tick of snow gathering on my jacket. Across the street, the cemetery gate stood open. A pale path of disturbed snow led from the road through the entrance, up the gravel lane, and then veered right toward the Hargrove grave. From where I was, I could see the shape of the bouquet, another new one, dark against the white. I crossed the street. The snow crunched under my boots, that clean, dry sound. At the gate, I stopped and looked down. The footprints were clear. Regular stride, heel, then toe, deep enough to show somebody had some weight to them. They went in, turned right, and stopped at the set-apart stone. There were no returning prints. The snow around the grave was smoothed in a wide, shallow oval, like someone had been standing there for a while, shifting their feet. My throat felt dry. I told myself this was the perfect setup for some neighborhood kid to mess with whoever happened to be watching. "Okay," I said softly, mostly to prove I still had a voice. "You're doing this to yourself." I followed the prints up the path and over to the right. When I reached the Hargrove grave, I stopped beside it and glanced back toward the street. Our house's front windows glowed faintly, curtains drawn. No movement inside that I could see. I don't know why I did it, but I lifted my boot and carefully stepped next to one of the prints, then another, lining my feet up beside them. The sizes were almost identical. I stood there long enough for the tips of my ears to start hurting from the cold. The silence felt thicker out there, pressed in by the snow and the iron fence. Finally, I turned around, went back down the path, and latched the gate behind me. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the house. The wood contracted with little ticking sounds. The radiator rattled and knocked. Somewhere in the walls, a pipe gave a low, hollow thud. Around 2, I think I dozed off. I didn't check the time when I woke up again. What snapped me awake was the sound of the side door. It wasn't loud, just the soft, unmistakable click of the latch, the slight groan of hinges, and then the muted sound of the door settling back into place. No footsteps, no voices, just those 3 little sounds. I held my breath and listened. The house went quiet again, the kind of quiet that makes your own heartbeat seem intrusive. I told myself Lauren had maybe gone outside for a smoke. She doesn't smoke, but my brain was grasping at options. Or to check something in her car. I waited for floorboard creaks, a bathroom door closing, some sign that somebody was moving around. Nothing. The next morning, when I got up and went to the kitchen, the side door was closed, but not fully latched. The deadbolt was still turned, but the door itself hadn't caught. A thin draft slipped in around the edge, and the linoleum near the threshold was damp and marked with faint, melting, dirty prints. "You left the door open last night," I called down the hall. Lauren appeared in the doorway, hair in a messy bun, one sock on and one off. "No, I didn't," she said. "I was out till 3. Check my texts." "Maybe I didn't latch it," I said. "I was out by the trash cans earlier." She squinted at the floor. "Those aren't from your boots," she said. "Yours are bigger." We both stood there, looking at the smudges. They were just shapes, imperfect ovals of thawed snow with bits of grit in them. You can see anything you want in something that blurry. "I'll get a rug," I said. "This floor sucks." That could have been the end of it. Dirty prints, drafty old house, and absent-minded tenant. But once you start noticing one set of things you can't explain, the others line up behind them. Lauren started mentioning the voices around that time. Not like full words, nothing cinematic. She said she'd be walking home from the bar around 2:30, passing the cemetery, and she'd think she heard someone say her name. Not loud, not even clear. Just the shape of it in the wind. Like when somebody calls you from another room and you can't quite catch it, she said. I turn around and there's no one. It's so quiet, Caleb. The houses are dark. You can see the river between them. And there's just nothing. Then I think about that bench, looking at that one grave, and it feels like I'm the one on display. "You're tired," I said. "You're working nights. Your sleep's messed up. Your brain is doing that thing where it tries to make patterns out of noise." She nodded slowly. "Yeah, probably." But she started coming in faster after work. Less time on the porch, more quick key turn, door slam, chain lock. One afternoon in early December, I was working from home when there was a knock at the front door. Not loud, just 3 medium taps. I opened it to find our upstairs neighbor, an older guy named Ron, standing there in his slippers, holding a grocery bag. "You dropped this in the hall," he said, handing it to me. It was ours, sure enough. Lauren's cereal and some paper towels. We'd missed a bag from the car. "Thanks," I said. "Sorry about that." He hesitated, glancing past me toward the front window. "You folks settling in okay?" he asked. "Yeah, pretty much," I said. "Place has character." He snorted. "That's one word for it." He shifted his weight from foot to foot. "You get used to the cemetery," he added, like he'd said it to a dozen tenants before. "After a while, you stop seeing it." "I don't mind it," I said. "It's kind of nice, actually. Quiet." Ron scratched his cheek. You ever look at the old property map? He asked. From before they converted this place into apartments? No, I said. I've only seen what's on the listing. He nodded, mostly to himself. If you're curious, the library's got it. They moved the fence when they built this house, expanded the road by a couple feet too. Hard to tell what was where back then. People weren't as fussy about lines. I must have made some kind of face because he added, don't worry, they did it all legal. Just folks back then didn't always move what they should have moved, if that makes sense. Not really, I said, trying to keep it light. He gave a small shrug. Some things stay on paper, he said. Some things stay in the ground. Anyway, welcome to the neighborhood. After he left, I went straight to the window. The cemetery sat there, iron fence catching the pale winter sun. The bench faced its usual grave. The solitary Hargrove stone stood off to the right, just inside what would have been the old line if the road were narrower. I told myself I was being dramatic. That evening, I went to the library anyway. The reference section is in the back, near the windows that look over the river. I asked the librarian about old maps, and she pointed me toward a big flat drawer where they kept rolled up surveys and plats. It took me a while to find our block, but when I did, I saw it pretty quickly. The cemetery used to be slightly bigger, not by much. Just enough that the original boundary line cut into what's now the narrow strip of yard in front of our house and a bit under the sidewalk. The iron fence had been installed later, set back a few feet. And in the older sketch, there were more little rectangles inside the cemetery than there are stones now. I traced the original line with my finger and tried to match it to the mental map I had of our street. The Hargrove grave in the current layout sat exactly on that old border, right where the drawing blurred and the ink had bled a little, like water had run across it at some point. Finding what you need? The librarian asked, and I realized she'd come up behind me, a stack of books in her arms. Yeah, I said quickly, letting my hand drop. Just curious. She nodded slowly, eyes on the map. People always are, she said. That little cemetery makes them that way. Do you know anything about the Hargroves? I asked before I could talk myself out of it. Her expression tightened in that polite way people do when they've hit their limits. Family names blur together after a while, she said. Records aren't perfect. Best to let the past rest where it is. On the walk home, the wind cut through my coat, and my fingers went numb even with gloves on. As I turned onto our street, the sun was slipping behind the houses, leaving the cemetery in that flat, gray-blue shadow that comes before full dark. The bench, the path, the set-apart stone, they were all exactly where they always were. Normal, boring even. When I got to our front door, the knob wouldn't turn. From inside, I heard the chain slide, and then Lauren opened it a crack. Why is the chain on? I asked. Her face was pale. Somebody knocked, she said. Okay, I said. Maybe a delivery? It was our knock, she said. You know how you knock? 3 times like that? She imitated it on the wood. They did that, just now. I thought you'd forgotten your keys. But when I looked out, there was no one. Maybe they walked away, I said. Before I got to the door, she asked. It was like 2 seconds. I stepped inside and looked past her through the hallway window. From that angle, you can see straight to the cemetery gate. It was closed, but the latch was hanging open, swinging a little in the wind. That night was the closest I came to actually being scared. Not panicked, just this steady, cold awareness that something didn't add up anymore. I kept telling myself there were explanations. Delivery people are fast. Kids play weird games. Old houses shift. Sensors malfunction. Paper gets wet. But explanations are only comforting when they line up cleanly with what you're seeing. A couple of weeks later, I was sorting mail at the kitchen counter when I found an envelope from the management company. Annual inspection notice, a maintenance flyer, and a photocopy of something that must have gone to all the tenants. An old property information sheet. It had clearly been copied and recopied over the years. The text was fuzzy, the lines gray, but you could still read most of it. Built 1912, converted to 4 units in 1978. Owner history, notes about plumbing, talk about asbestos removal. And in the middle of the page, under previous incidents, someone had typed, decades ago, a short line. Discrepancy with adjoining cemetery records, resolved with city. Next to that, written in blue ink and then crossed out so hard the paper had torn, were 2 words, removed, unknown. I stared at that little scar in the paper for a long time. Then I put the sheet back in the envelope and slid it into a drawer with the rest of the boring house stuff, lease, insurance, emergency contacts. After that, I stopped asking questions. Life didn't change in any big way. I still woke up, went to work, paid bills. Lauren still worked nights, slammed the screen door, complained about her boss. Ron still shuffled up and down the stairs. The radiator still knocked. The wood still creaked. The porch light still flicked on every so often with no one on the steps. But there were small things. The bench in the cemetery always looked like someone had just gotten up, even in rain or snow. In fresh snow, there were sometimes footprints that didn't lead back to the gate. Once, I came into the living room to find the curtains drawn back when I was sure I'd closed them, and the view from the window lined up exactly with that bench and that set-apart grave. Sometimes, when I was working at home and the afternoon light came in at a certain angle, I'd look up and see Lauren sitting at the table with her laptop, and behind her, in the glass reflection, there'd be the faintest suggestion of a figure on the bench across the street. Not clear enough to describe, just a darker shape where there shouldn't be one. If I turned around to look directly, there'd be nothing. We don't talk about it much now. There's no point. We both see what we see, and we both keep reaching for normal explanations, even as they wear thin. I still walk past the cemetery sometimes. I still hear dogs barking far away, leaves scraping along the pavement, the occasional distant train horn. The insects still go quiet for no good reason, and then start up again. The gate still swings sometimes when there isn't enough wind to move anything else. Maybe it's the angle of the hill, or passing trucks, or some quirk of metal and rust. That's what I tell myself. I don't know what happened to the records Carol said they lost. I don't know who wrote those crossed out words on the inspection sheet, or what was removed, or where it went, or if it ever went anywhere at all. I do know this. No matter the season, no matter the weather, no matter how early I wake up, or how late I stay at the window, I have never once seen anyone step through that gate to tend the Hargrove grave. The flowers on that grave are always fresh. My name is Caleb, and I'm from Stillwater, Minnesota. I live in this old 2-story place that faces a little cemetery across the road. When I say faces, I mean you walk out our front door, step off the porch, and there it is, right across the narrow street. A compact, brick-walled patch of graves, maybe the size of a small parking lot. It's not spooky or anything. At least that's not how it felt when we moved in. It just looked old and kind of tired, like most things around here. I'm a data analyst. I work from home, mostly. Spreadsheets, dashboards, weird client requests that don't make sense but still pay on time. My cousin Ryan moved in with me last year when he got a job at the small hospital on the other side of town. Night shifts, mostly. We weren't super close growing up, but when he texted me, "Hey, any chance you need help with rent?" I said sure. Now he takes the smaller upstairs room facing the cemetery, and I've got the bigger one facing the backyard. The cemetery has this low brick wall around it, just high enough that you can sit on it if you don't mind a bit of moss on your jeans. The entrance is a gap in the wall, with 2 short brick pillars where a gate probably used to be. Inside, it's neat near the front. Gravel path, trimmed grass, that kind of thing. But if you look toward the back, you can see where they kinda gave up. Weeds, taller grass, ivy climbing the stones. There's a broken angel statue right in the center. No head, just the wings and torso. Like something leaned on it too hard and snapped the rest off. The stones are old, Victorian era mostly. Late 1800s dates. Lots of curly script that's hard to read unless the light hits it just right. A lot of the names are the same. Whole family plots with identical last names. One corner has 3 stones in a row, all different people, all the same year of death. That stood out to me the first week we were here, but I just figured maybe it was some epidemic or something. This town has a little historical society, and they love that kind of story. Stillwater itself is quiet. Tourists pass through for the river, and the old downtown on weekends. But our street is a couple blocks back, on a hill where people mostly just walk their dogs and complain about property taxes. You get the usual sounds. A distant train horn at night, a couple of crows yelling at each other from the trees, the hum of someone's lawnmower on a Saturday morning. In summer, you can hear boats on the river if the wind is right. In winter, it's mostly just the radiator knocking and the house wood settling. My days are pretty simple. I wake up, make coffee, open my laptop at the kitchen table, and stare out the window between emails. From that window, you see the cemetery straight on. The broken angel, the low brick wall, a couple of old maples that drop leaves onto the graves every fall. It's almost calming, actually. People like to say cemeteries are peaceful, and I kind of get that. Everything's still. Nothing changes much. At least, that's what I used to think. Ryan and I have a sort of routine. He comes home from his shift around 7 in the morning, usually looking half dead. We talk for a few minutes while I drink coffee, and he eats cereal straight from the box. Then he crashes, and I start my work. In the evenings, if he's not working, we sit on the porch with a beer, watch the sun go down over the stones, and trade dumb stories from our days. He jokes about the neighbors across the street sometimes, meaning the people buried there. They're quiet, he'll say, staring at the graves. Best kind of neighbors. It started with the gate, or, I guess, the entrance. There's no gate anymore, but I still call it that in my head. One windy afternoon in October, I looked up from a report and saw the entrance clear and open, like always. Nothing special. A few minutes later, when I looked again, something about the view felt off. Took me a second to realize what it was. A single plastic supermarket bouquet sitting on one of the older graves near the front. Bright colors against all that gray stone. I hadn't seen anyone walk in or out. Maybe I just missed them. That happens. I'm not staring out there all day. The flowers were on one of those stones with the fancy script, the kind that looks like it was written with a fountain pen. I could barely make out the last name from the window, but I recognized the year, 1892. Same as one of the other stones in that family plot. It stuck in my head, mostly because it was such an old grave to suddenly have fresh flowers. That night, the wind picked up. You could hear it moving through the trees, and the old house made these low creaking sounds, like someone walking slowly through the attic. The porch light kept flickering. It had been doing that for weeks, though, so I didn't think about it much. The motion sensor over the driveway clicked on a few times, too. Probably just leaves blowing around or a raccoon. Stuff like that. Ryan came home around 7 and tossed his keys on the counter. "Dude," he said, squinting at the window. "Creepy bouquet out there." "Yeah," I said. "Someone visited, I guess." "At 6 in the morning?" he said. "It wasn't there at like 5 when I parked." I shrugged. Maybe they came really early. He stared at the cemetery for a second, then went, "Whatever," and headed upstairs. The bouquet was still there when I went out for lunch. The plastic wrap rattled a little when the breeze came through. I heard gravel crunch across the street, turned, and saw no one there. Just the wind nudging a few loose stones in the path. The next day, The bouquet was gone. Not wilted, not tossed aside, just gone. No plastic, no stems, nothing. I only noticed because the grave looked weirdly bare without it. It's like when you move a piece of furniture and the empty space feels too big. I tried to tell myself the family came back and took the flowers home or something. People do that. Or maybe teenage kids thought it'd be funny to steal them. It didn't really matter. Except 2 days later, I saw another bouquet. Different colors this time. This one was set on the stone behind the first one, in the same family plot, same last name, same year again, 1892. I mentioned it to Ryan that night while we were on the porch. Maybe someone's doing that find a grave thing, he said. You know, where people go around decorating old graves, posting pictures online. Could be, I said. It's always that same family, though. He shrugged. At least they're consistent. That would have been the end of it if that's all that happened. Flowers on old graves. Mysterious, but harmless. But the thing is, that wasn't the only change. One morning, walking down the front steps to take out the trash, I felt the weirdest sensation under my shoe, like I was stepping onto a half-inflated ball or a soft mound. I looked down. The sidewalk was clear. No toys, no branches, nothing. But when I stepped off the last concrete slab and onto the patch of dirt between our property and the street, my foot sank just a little, like the ground was softer there. I pushed my heel down and felt it give another inch, then stop. The dirt looked normal. A few scattered leaves, a bit of gravel, nothing else. I told myself it was just erosion, maybe something dug under there, like a chipmunk or a mole. We get those sometimes. I crossed the street to roll the trash bin back from the curb. As I did, I heard this faint crunching sound from the cemetery, like someone walking slowly on gravel. I stopped and listened. The wind settled. The sound stopped too. Across the road, the gravel path was empty. You know that feeling when you're sure someone's there, but when you look, there's nothing? It wasn't some huge, oh my god moment. It was more like that low-grade, something's off feeling. I took the bin back to the house and decided I needed more coffee. That afternoon, during my lunch break, I walked over to the cemetery. I don't know why. Just to prove to myself there was nothing weird going on, I guess. The brick wall felt cool. Under my hand when I climbed over the lowest part, instead of going through the entrance. The gravel path crunched under my sneakers, louder than it sounded from our porch. Up close, you see more little things. Grass pushing through cracks, ants working in tiny lines near the base of a stone, the way some of the letters are almost gone, where the rain hit them for 100-and-something years. I walked to that same family plot. The bouquet I'd seen in the morning was there, slightly wilted now. It sat on the grave of a woman, last name matching the others, same death year as the 3 stones behind her. I knelt down to read the names better. I remember the smell more than anything. Damp dirt, cut grass from somewhere nearby, and this faint, dusty stone smell that clings to your fingers after you touch it. Behind the family plot, near the back half where the grass is taller, the ground looked uneven. Not like regular bumps, more like a long, low swell, as if someone had pushed up from below in a lazy, broad curve. I told myself it was just roots. There's a maple back there, whose roots are probably wrecking everything. The ground thing kept bugging me, though. A few days later, I noticed the swell had shifted. Not dramatically, just moved a little, like it had drifted a foot to the left. I thought I was misremembering. So I started paying attention. Every time I walked over there, the soft, raised patch seemed to be in a slightly different spot. Sometimes closer to the family plot, sometimes further away. I didn't tell Ryan about that part. Flowers are one thing. Shifting dirt is something else. I knew how it would sound. Instead, I went to the little historical society one Saturday. It's 3 blocks down, in an old brick building that used to be a post office. Inside, it smells like old paper and floor polish. A woman in her 60s sat behind the front desk, glasses on a chain. cardigan, the whole stereotype. "Hey," I said, feeling stupid immediately. "Do you guys have records on the cemetery up on Hill Street?" She gave me a quick look, then turned toward a file cabinet. "Family research?" she asked. "Just curious," I said. We moved in across from it. Thought I'd read up a little. There's one family plot that caught my eye. She hesitated at the cabinet for a second. It wasn't long, but I noticed it. "Which family?" she said, not turning around. I told her the last name and the death year I kept seeing. She opened a drawer and flipped through manila folders, the metal rods clacking a little. After a minute, she pulled one out, thumbed through it, then put it back. "Huh," she said under her breath. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," she said too fast. "Some of the records were moved to the county archive. We don't keep everything here anymore." "Oh," I said. "Can I go look at those?" "They're not open on weekends," she said, "and their catalog is a mess. It's all mixed with other parishes and so on. It's complicated." She gave me a tight smile, the kind people give when they want you to go away without being mean about it. "Was there some kind of epidemic in 1892? I asked. "There's a bunch of stones with that year." She pressed her lips together. "Winters were hard back then," she said. "People died. We don't always know why." "Right," I said. "Okay, thanks." On the way out, I passed a bulletin board with old photos. One of them was of the cemetery, black and white, taken from almost the exact angle of our front porch. Same broken angel, but with its head still on. Same brick wall, but taller. In the photo, the back half looked flatter, more orderly. No swell in the ground. That night, Ryan had to work. I sat on the porch alone, just nursing a beer and staring at the cemetery. The air was chilly enough that you could see your breath if you exhaled slowly. Usually by then, you hear insects, little high-pitched chirps and clicks in the grass. That night, though, it was quieter than usual. A dog barked once down the street and then shut up. The porch light flickered, then steadied. I heard the screen door creak a bit in the wind behind me. Across the street, something shifted. Just a small sound, gravel moving under weight. I leaned forward, squinting. "Hello?" I called before I thought about how dumb that was. No answer, just the wind nudging the branches of the maple at the back fence. Leaves scraped along the pavement like dry paper. Somewhere far off, a train horn sounded, long and low. I stood up, set my beer down on the railing, and stepped off the porch. The ground by the front steps felt soft again. Just for an instant, I froze, looked down at my feet. The dirt looked normal. I walked to the curb, crossed the road, and stopped at the brick wall. The cemetery was empty. The air felt cooler, though, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees just on that side of the street. My breath came out in a thin cloud. I waited for the crunch of my weight on the gravel path. When it came, it sounded louder than I expected, echoing off the stones. I don't know why I went to the back. Maybe because that's where I didn't want to go. The taller grass brushed my jeans, leaving little cold patches where it touched skin through the fabric. The smell of damp earth was stronger there, mixed with something faint and metallic, like old rust. The swell was back, bigger now, a long, raised oval of earth, maybe a foot high at the center, stretching about 6 feet. It looked freshly disturbed, but there was no shovel mark, no pile of extra dirt anywhere. Just a smooth, gentle rise. I stood there, staring at it, feeling stupid and nervous at the same time. "You're being weird," I muttered to myself. "It's just roots or something." As I watched, a single clump of dry grass near the top of the swell trembled, then lay flat, as if something had pressed down from underneath. Not hard, not sudden, just a slow, deliberate settling, like a quiet breath. A gust of wind came through, and I jumped a little, telling myself that's all it was. Just wind. I backed away. my shoes sinking slightly into the softer dirt near the base of the swell, and then I turned and walked out, faster than I'd meant to. The crunch of gravel followed me all the way to the entrance. When I stepped back onto the asphalt, the ground felt solid again. The air felt warmer, too, like I'd crossed some invisible line. I didn't sleep much that night. The house made all its usual sounds, the radiator knocking, the fridge humming, the occasional creak from the stairs as the wood settled. Around 3 a.m, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming down the hallway toward my room. I sat up. "Ryan?" I called. The footsteps stopped, just one more soft tap, like someone putting their weight down carefully, and then silence. I got up, opened my door, and looked into the hallway. It was dark, just a dim strip of light from the nightlight near the bathroom. Ryan's door was shut. I watched it for a second, waiting for it to open. It didn't. The floor under my bare feet felt cool, colder than it should have been. I stepped forward and felt something gritty under my toes. I flipped the hall light on. There was a faint trail of dirt on the hardwood. Not chunks, just a fine, dusty smear that started near the top of the stairs and ended right in front of my bedroom door. When I touched it with my fingers, it smelled like the back half of the cemetery. Damp, a little metallic, and old. In the morning, I asked Ryan if he'd tracked dirt in. "You think I went for a jog in the middle of the night?" he said, rubbing his eyes. "No, man. I came home, dropped onto the bed, died for 6 hours. "Did you hear anything?" I asked. He hesitated. "Yeah," he said. "But I thought it was you, like walking around." "When?" I said. 3-something, he said. "It woke me up. I heard someone in the hall, then your door. I almost yelled at you to stop pacing." We both went quiet. Later that day, during my lunch break, I went back to the Historical Society. Same woman at the desk. "Hi again," I said. "Sorry to bug you." She looked up, and I swear there was a flash of recognition, like she already knew why I was there. "You're on Hill Street," she said. "Yeah," I said. "Listen, I don't want to be weird, but that family plot I mentioned, are you sure there's nothing else in the records?" She pressed her lips together, then sighed. "It was a bad winter," she said. "Influenza, I believe. Several families lost members." "All in the same year?" I asked. "It happens," she said. "Did they ever move any graves?" I asked. "Like relocate bodies from one place to another?" She looked at me for a long moment. "Why are you asking that?" she said quietly. "There's some uneven ground back there," I said. "And my house is right across from it. It kind of looks like—" I didn't finish. She looked down at her hands. "Some of the older plots weren't marked properly," she said. "Back then, record keeping wasn't as strict. There was a time, yes, when they shifted some burials closer to the church and rearranged things. It was all in accordance with the law." "When?" I asked. She hesitated again. "Around 1910, I believe," she said. "Look, we don't encourage people to go wandering in the back. The ground is unstable in places. You could twist an ankle." "That's not really what I'm worried about," I said. She didn't answer. I thanked her, even though I wasn't thankful, and left. As I stepped outside, the chill hit me again, stronger than it had any right to be for that time of year. On my way home, I stopped at a convenience store to grab milk. The clerk, a guy in his 50s who always wears a ball cap with the local football team on it, looked at my address when I pulled out my ID for something. "Hill Street," he said. "You're right across from the graveyard, huh?" "Yeah," I said. "Nice view." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "My grandma used to say those graves aren't what people think they are," he said. "What does that mean?" I asked. He shrugged, like he regretted saying it. "She grew up around there. Said they never got everybody where they were supposed to be. Some were left out. Some ended up where they didn't belong. Old people talk, you know." "You believe that?" I said. "It doesn't matter if I do," he said. "You'll hear what you hear." I didn't like that answer. That night, Ryan was off again. He pulled a chair up to his window, the one facing the cemetery, and lit a candle on the sill because the lamp in his room has a bad switch. "Man, this place really leans into the stereotype," he said, staring out. "Cemetery, old house, flickering lights. I should start a YouTube channel." "You'd last 2 episodes," I said. "Then you'd get bored." He smiled but didn't argue. I was in my room scrolling through emails I didn't care about when I heard him call out. "Caleb," he said, "come here a sec." I went to his doorway. He pointed out the window. "Tell me I'm imagining that." Across the street, near the back half of the cemetery, the ground was noticeably raised. Even from that distance, in the glow from the streetlight and the faint spill from someone's porch down the hill, you could see the shape. A long oval, too precise to be just a random bump. "I mean, maybe they're doing some work back there," I said. "At 9 p.m., he said. We watched for a minute. The insects were strangely quiet again. No chirps, no buzzing, nothing. Even the usual distant dog bark was missing. Ryan shifted in his chair. "Look at the statue," he said. I focused on the broken angel. In the weird mix of light and shadow, it almost looked like the remaining half of the face was turned slightly more toward our house than I remembered. That's stupid, I know. Statues don't pivot, but that's how it looked. "Forget it," I said. "I'm going downstairs." We ended up watching TV until late, volume low. Both of us pretending to be into a show nobody cared about. Every so often, the motion light by the driveway clicked on for no reason. The radiator knocked in uneven patterns, like a slow heartbeat that kept losing its rhythm. Around midnight, Ryan went up to bed. I stayed in the kitchen, cleaning up, just to have something to do with my hands. At some point, the fridge compressor kicked off, and the house fell completely silent. You don't notice how many little sounds there are until they all stop. That's when I heard the crunch. Not inside, outside, across the street. Gravel, slow, deliberate steps. One, then another, then another. I froze, dish towel in my hand, water dripping off the plate into the sink. The steps stopped. I walked to the front window, staying to the side of the curtain so I wouldn't be visible from outside. I peeked through a narrow gap. The cemetery looked empty. No flashlight beams, no figures moving among the stones. The swell in the back was higher now, or maybe it was my imagination. The broken angel seemed to be facing forward again. I was about to turn away when I noticed the brick wall. Right across from our front yard, near the lowest part, there was a dark smear on the bricks, like wet earth. A little trail led down the outside of the wall, across the narrow strip of grass, and onto the pavement. My stomach did this slow, unpleasant twist. I didn't sleep much. When I finally did drift off, I had this half-dream where I was standing in the cemetery again, watching the ground rise and fall like a slow, heavy breath. Every time it rose, the air got colder. Every time it fell, something under it rolled a little closer to the surface. In the morning, I found actual footprints on the porch. Not bare feet, not shoe prints I could recognize, just vague patches where dirt had pressed into the wood and then smudged outward. Like whoever, or whatever, had walked there was carrying damp soil that crumbled as it moved. The trail stopped right at the front door. There were no marks going back down. Ryan stared at it with me, rubbing his jaw. "Okay," he said finally. "I'm not loving this." "Probably kids messing around," I said. My voice sounded thin, even to me. "They hopped the wall, came over here, thought it'd be funny." "What kids are hauling cemetery dirt onto someone's porch at night?" he said. "That's a very specific prank, man." I didn't have an answer. Later that week, I went back to the cemetery one more time. I told myself it was dumb, but staying inside and pretending everything was fine felt dumber. The air was cool, but not freezing. The sky was overcast in that flat, gray way that makes everything look like a photograph. The swell was closer to the front now. Not right up by the entrance, but definitely not all the way in the back either. It sat halfway along the main path, between the broken angel and that family plot with the matching last names. Someone had placed a new bouquet on one of them. The plastic crinkled softly in the breeze. I checked the stone. Same year, 1892, same family. The swell stretched out behind that plot, almost perfectly lined up with the row of stones. I looked down at the dates, following them one by one. Husband, wife, 3 children, all dead within months of each other. The last stone leaned slightly to one side. The ground under it slightly sunken, like whatever they'd put there had settled unevenly over time. On impulse, I checked the back of the stone, brushing off the lichen with my sleeve. There was an extra line carved there, fainter than the rest, like it had been added later. A name I recognized, not because I'd seen it before, but because it was my last name. Not uncommon, I told myself. Lots of families share last names. That doesn't mean anything. Still, my fingers felt numb against the cold stone. I went home. Ryan was getting ready for his shift. He stopped buttoning his shirt when he saw my face. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just weird down there." He glanced at the window. "I've been hearing stuff," he said quietly. "When I'm trying to sleep during the day, like someone walking in the hall, stopping outside my door." "You said that before," I said. "It's an old house." "I know what old houses sound like," he said. "This is different, like it stops when I listen, then starts again when I look away." We didn't have a good response for that. Now I work with noise on, music, podcasts, whatever. I leave the TV on in the background just so there's always something else to focus on. Silence feels wrong in this house now. Too wide, too available. I keep telling myself there are explanations. The ground shifts, roots grow, animals dig. Old records get lost or misfiled. People put flowers where they feel like putting flowers. Dirt tracks in from the outside. Houses creak, footsteps are just pipes or radiators or the neighbors slamming a door. Most days, I can almost believe all that. But every third night, like clockwork now, I hear the gravel outside. Slow, measured steps from the cemetery toward the street. The motion light clicks on. The insects go quiet. The house seems to hold its breath. I stay in my room and don't look out the window anymore. I've learned that whatever it is, it only moves when I'm not watching. And the fence was never meant to keep anyone out. My name is Calvin, and I'm from Stillwater, Minnesota. I've lived in the same little rental house for about 3 years now. It's a 1-story place with peeling white paint and a porch that leans just a bit, like it's tired. If you stand on that porch and look straight ahead, across the narrow street, you're staring at the old cemetery on the hill. People call it the old section to tell it apart from the newer cemetery out by the highway. This one is small, like a pocket someone forgot about, just tucked into the side of the hill with a low brick wall around most of it and a gap where I guess there used to be a gate. I work as a medical billing clerk at the small clinic about 10 minutes away. That sounds fancier than it is. I sit at a desk, type in codes, argue quietly with insurance portals, drink too much coffee, and go home. It's steady, and I'm not complaining. I'm usually off by 4:30, 5 if things are backed up. By the time I turn onto my street, the light hits that hill in a way that makes the old stones kind of glow. And for a long time, that was actually one of my favorite views of the day. I don't live alone. My cousin Leah moved in 2 years ago when she got a job at the middle school. 7th grade English. She needed a place. I needed help with rent, and we already knew each other's annoying habits, so it made sense. She's the kind of person who always has a tote bag, partly unzipped and a stack of graded papers on the coffee table. She's also the one who started joking about our neighbors across the street the first week she got here. The cemetery itself is older than it looks at first. If you walk closer, and I did, back when all this was just scenery, You see, most of the dates are from the Victorian era, late 1800s, early 1900s. A lot of the stones tilt a little, or they've sunk down so the grass is kind of swallowing them. There's moss on the lower edges, bright green after it rains. Someone, the city I guess, keeps the front section kind of trimmed, but the back half gets wild. The grass is taller back there, and there's this old cement bench facing one particular grave, like it's a seat in a tiny theater. I always thought that was sort of sweet in a weird way. Stillwater isn't big, but it's not tiny either. We get tourists in the summer who come for the river and the historic downtown. Our street is away from all that, up a hill where the traffic thins out, and you mostly just hear dogs barking and the distant hum of cars from the main road. At night, you can hear the train horn from way across town, and sometimes church bells. It's the kind of place where you recognize faces at the grocery store, but maybe don't know everyone's name. For the first couple of years, the cemetery was just part of the background. I'd hear gravel crunch when someone parked up there to visit a grave, or see the porch light reflect off the old stones when I let the cat out. The brick wall only comes up to maybe my hip, and there's no gate anymore, just a gap where a path of packed dirt goes between two short pillars. I used to cut through there on my evening walks just to save a few steps. It didn't feel creepy. Honestly, it felt calm. Leah teased me about it one night when we were having leftover pizza on the couch. She said, "You know, you're basically giving yourself a main character intro for some true crime podcast, right?" He loved walking through the cemetery alone at dusk. I told her it was efficient, and she rolled her eyes and said, "Sure, Calvin, efficiently haunted." Most nights were pretty ordinary. I'd get home, drop my keys in the same chipped bowl by the door, listen to the wood in the house pop in and settle like it always does. In the summer, we'd sit on the porch with cheap lawn chairs and watch the sky turn orange behind the hill. Sometimes there'd be fireflies floating over the graves, little dots of light drifting right over the stones. We'd point them out and make the same dumb jokes about it's the neighbors, and that was it. The first thing that felt a little off was the flowers. There are a couple of graves right near the front, two of them side by side with the same last name. The stones are worn down, and you can barely read the dates, but I remember noticing once that both death years were the same, 1893, I think. For a long time, those graves didn't have anything on them, just grass, an old stone like everything else. Then one Monday, early spring, I pulled into my driveway after work, and there were fresh flowers sitting on one of those twin graves. Not a big deal. People bring flowers to graves. I just noticed because the bouquet was really bright, like grocery store carnations, and the rest of the cemetery was still mostly gray and brown. I thought it was nice that someone still visited. A couple days later, it rained. One of those steady, soaking rains that make the whole street smell like wet dirt and leaves. When I came home that day, the flowers were still there, and they didn't look soaked at all. I guessed someone had replaced them, or maybe I just couldn't tell from far away. I didn't think much of it. It kept happening, though. I'd come home Tuesday or Friday or whatever random day, and there'd be a new arrangement on that same grave. Always the same style. Short, compact bouquet, usually carnations or mums, sometimes with a little plastic bow tucked in. Brand new every time. No wilted edges, no petals on the ground, and I never once saw anyone actually standing there to leave them. Leah noticed it before I said anything. One evening, we were on the porch, eating ice cream out of the carton, and she pointed with her spoon. "Those are different again," she said. "Do you ever see who puts them there?" I shook my head. "Probably comes when I'm at work." She said, "Yeah, but I'm off on Fridays. I was home all day last Friday, grading essays, staring out the window like a bored cat. Nobody went up there." "You probably just missed them," I said. "Could have been early." She clicked her tongue and shrugged, but later, when we went inside, I caught her looking out the window again. Around then, other small things started to stick out. The wind up on the hill is weird. Most days, it comes straight down the street, so you hear it in the trees and the gutters. But sometimes, it feels like it curls around the cemetery first, so the leaves in there start moving before the ones in our yard do. It's probably just how the hill is shaped, but I started noticing it more. Like the trees over the graves would begin to sway a few seconds before anything else. The brick wall has a gap where that dirt path starts. There's no gate, just a rusted hinge still stuck in the side of one pillar. I'd see that hinge swinging sometimes, as if a gate was still hanging there, even when the air felt still everywhere else. Little things like that, they're easy to shrug off. You say to yourself, hey, I'm tired, I'm noticing dumb stuff. The first time I heard something, I was taking the trash out. It was maybe 10 at night, cold enough that my breath came out in little puffs. The porch light flickered once when I opened the door. It does that sometimes too, but it picked a bad moment. I carried the bag down the 3 steps, felt the wood creak under my feet, and headed around the side to the bins. You know how sound carries differently at night? It was quiet, no cars, just the distant hum from the highway and some dog barking blocks away. I lifted the lid on the trash can and heard what I thought at first was wind moving through leaves. Kind of a soft, rushing sound. Then tucked inside, that was something that sounded a little like a voice. Not words I could make out, just a mumble, like a radio on low in another room. I stood there with the lid in my hand, listening, and it stopped. All at once. The trees stopped moving too. Even the dog down the street went silent. I remember saying out loud, okay, that's creepy, and laughing at myself, trying to break it. I dropped the lid back down and walked back toward the porch a little faster than usual. The steps groaned when I hit them, and when I turned to close the door, I glanced at the cemetery out of habit. The flowers on that grave were bright even in the porch light. Still perfect. No petals on the ground. Inside, Leah was on the couch scrolling through her phone. You okay? She asked, glancing up. You look like you saw something. Just heard something, I said. Wind being weird, she smirked. Your neighbors saying hi. I rolled my eyes and flipped on the TV to drown it out. I didn't tell her about the way everything had gone quiet. Over the next few weeks, the little things started lining up. Not in a dramatic way, just repeat patterns. The porch light would flicker when I was standing at the door, looking out at the hill, but almost never when I was just coming home with groceries. The motion sensor light on the side of the house, the one pointing toward the driveway, started going on by itself around the same time every night. 1:17 a.m., 1:20 a.m., somewhere in that window. I know because I could see the flash in the corner of my bedroom, and I started checking the clock. I went out there once when it happened, wrapped in a sweatshirt, sliding my feet into shoes without socks. The gravel in our driveway crunched under me, and the air was that kind of cold that feels thin. The motion light was on, shining across the driveway and catching the edge of the brick wall across the street. Nothing moved, no cat, no raccoon, nobody walking by. Just that light buzzing, and then it clicked off. When I turned to go back inside, I heard it again, that low, almost voice sound. It was coming from the direction of the cemetery. Not loud, not even obviously human, just something layered into the wind that made my brain think, someone's talking. I couldn't make out words, and I didn't move closer. I just stood there with my hand on the door handle until the sound faded. Leah joked about the motion light the next morning. Your ghost likes a schedule, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. I woke up around 1:30 and saw it shining right through my blinds. I checked, I said. There was nothing there. Maybe it's just busted, she shrugged. Or maybe one of your Victorian neighbors likes late-night walks. She didn't sound scared. That helped. Every time I thought about getting spooked, I'd hear her voice in my head making fun of it, and it would flatten out again. One Saturday, we were both off and ended up in the little historical society building near downtown. Leah needed some information for a school project, and I was mostly along for the ride. The place smells like paper and old wood, with a radiator that knocks every few minutes. There was an older woman at the desk, gray hair pulled back, glasses on a chain. Classic librarian vibe, even though she's not a librarian. While Leah was talking to her about some local author, I wandered over to a shelf of binders labeled cemeteries. There were maps and lists of names typed out in that blurry way old copies get. I pulled out the one with our hill on it, mostly out of curiosity. The map showed the rows and plot numbers, and there was a list of surnames underneath. I skimmed down the page, looking for that pair of graves near the front, the ones from 1893. When I found the surname, I noticed there were only 3 entries: husband, wife, and a child who died a few years earlier. Same last name, same section. That made sense. But under location, the husband and wife weren't listed as being near the front wall. According to the map, they were supposed to be farther back, closer to the bench. I traced the little squares with my finger, checked the plot numbers again, kind of frowning to myself. "You looking for someone?" the woman at the desk asked suddenly. Her voice made me jump a little. "Oh," I said, holding up the binder. "No, just checking out the cemetery across from my house. I think the map might be off though. Those 2 with the same last name, there's a pair right by the front wall, but the map says they're farther back." She watched me a second too long before answering, like she was deciding how much to say. "Those old maps aren't always accurate," she said finally. "They moved some stones around over the years, erosion and such." Then she gave a small, quick smile that didn't touch her eyes. "You live near there?" "Right across the street," I said. "Little white house, sagging porch." Her smile faded just slightly. "Ah," she said. "That one." "What does that mean?" I asked, trying to keep it light. She shook her head and adjusted her glasses. "Old property," she said. "Weather's hard on those hills. You be careful with that driveway ice in the winter. People fall." That was it. She turned back to Leah's paperwork like she'd closed a door. I told myself I was reading into it. People in small towns love to sound mysterious without actually having a story. Things at home didn't exactly explode after that. There was no big moment. It was more like someone slowly turning down a dimmer switch on how comfortable the house felt. I'd be doing dishes and realize I'd been staring out the window at the same grave for a full minute, water still running, plate in my hands. Or I'd wake up at night and feel sure I'd heard the creak of the porch steps, even though Leah swore she hadn't gone outside. One rainy Tuesday, I came home to find mud on the living room floor. Not a lot, just a few partial footprints near the front door, like someone had stepped in, paused, and then, what? Wiped their shoes carefully and gone on. Except there weren't any more prints past that. No smears, no trail toward the hallway. And both pairs of our shoes were in their usual spots by the mat, clean. "Leah," I called, "you track something in?" She came out of her room in leggings and a school sweatshirt, hair in a messy bun. "Haven't left the house," she said. "I've been buried in grating hell since noon." I pointed at the floor. "So what's that?" She frowned and came closer. The mud was darker than the usual dirt from our yard, almost gray with tiny bits of gravel in it. She looked at it, then at me. "You tell me," she said. We both did that thing where you laugh a little too loudly and say, "House must be haunted." But neither of us bent down to touch the prints. I ended up cleaning them with paper towels, holding my breath for no real reason. That night, the motion light came on twice. I started noticing temperature drops in certain spots. There's a stretch of hallway between my room and the bathroom where the floorboards are a little warped. Walking through there, I'd feel the air get colder for just 3 or 4 steps, then it would be normal again. The heater was working fine. I checked the vents. Leah said maybe it was bad insulation. That made sense until I noticed it didn't matter what the thermostat was set to. That little patch of air stayed just a bit colder, like you'd opened a freezer door and closed it again. One evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, going through a stack of bills, when I heard Leah talking in the living room. At first, I thought she was on the phone. Her voice had that slightly lifted, polite tone people use when they're trying to be friendly with someone they don't know well. I could hear her pause, then murmur something, then pause again. I got up to grab a drink, and as I walked past the doorway, I glanced in. The TV was off. Leah was sitting on the couch, turned slightly toward the front window, like she'd been looking out at the cemetery. Her mouth was closed. She wasn't holding her phone. She was just sitting there, staring at nothing. "Who were you talking to?" I asked. She jumped. "Jesus, Calvin. Warn me," she said, hand to her chest. "What?" "You were talking," I said. "I heard you." "No, I wasn't." She looked genuinely confused. "I was just thinking, grating in my head, I guess." I stared at her for a second, then shrugged it off. "Never mind," I said. "Must have heard the TV from next door." We don't share a wall with anyone. A couple nights later, it happened to me. I woke up around 3 to use the bathroom. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking from the baseboard heat. As I stepped into the hallway, the cold patch brushed over me, raising goosebumps on my arms. I came back, half asleep, and was shutting my bedroom door when I heard my own voice. It sounded like me, but from the living room. A low murmur, a few words I couldn't quite catch, then a pause. Then a soft reply in a voice I didn't recognize. Like someone answering back, my skin prickled. I stood there with the door half closed, listening. The house settled with a little pop in the ceiling, and the sound stopped. I told myself I'd started dreaming before I even fully woke up. That happens, right? Audio lag from your brain or something. I didn't go check the living room. I just shut my door, crawled back into bed, and pretended that was enough. During the day, everything was fine. I mean, mostly fine. I started getting this habit of counting things. How many steps from the porch to the street? How many headstones you could see from our front window? How many times the hinge on that invisible gate swung while I was watching? It was something to hang my brain on instead of the feeling that the house was listening. One Sunday afternoon, I was sorting through an old box of paperwork in the hall closet. Lease agreements, utility bills from years ago, that kind of thing. The box came with the house. It had been shoved in the back, and I'd always meant to toss it, but never did. I figured I'd finally clean it out. Near the bottom was a manila folder with a realtor's logo on it. Inside was some kind of disclosure form from the previous owner. Most of it was boring: foundation repairs, roof age, water heater. Near the end, there was a section about adjacent properties of note, and whoever filled it out had written in neat blue ink: historic cemetery across the street. Family plots moved from original location due to hill erosion. Under that, the signature line had a name. I stared at it for a second before it clicked why it felt familiar. It was the same surname as those 2 graves near the front wall. Same last name, slightly different spelling of the first, but close enough. The date next to the signature was 6 years ago. I don't know why, but I walked straight to the front window with that paper still in my hand. The cemetery was quiet. The wind had died down, and the trees were still. The 2 graves by the wall were where they always were. Fresh flowers sat on the nearer one, bright and clean. I checked the death year in my memory, 1893, both of them. I double-checked later, walking over there in daylight, pretending I was just stretching my legs. The dates hadn't changed, obviously, but standing by the stones, looking at that name, I had this weird, heavy feeling that someone had folded time over itself and was pressing down on the crease. Leah found me at the sink that night, staring out the window instead of washing the plate in my hands. You okay? She asked, leaning on the counter. Do you ever feel like we're in the wrong place? I said. It sounded stupid as soon as it came out. She laughed softly. Like existentially, or like we should have rented the duplex with the better parking. I mean this house, I said. This spot. Across from that exact hill. She watched me for a second, then looked out at the cemetery. I mean, it's not my dream view, she said, but the rent's good. That woman at the Historical Society said they moved stones around, I said, because of erosion. Yeah, Leah said. I guess that makes sense. Do you think they moved bodies or just the stones? I asked. She frowned. Why are you asking me that? The motion light flashed on at the side of the house, brightening the edge of the window. We both turned our heads at the same time. There was no movement, just that cold buzz of electricity. After a few seconds, it clicked off again. Leah rubbed her arms. You're starting to weird me out, Cal, she said quietly. Can we not talk about bodies? I dropped the subject. We watched some dumb cooking show until it was time to sleep, like that would reset the house. That night, the footsteps started. They weren't dramatic, no heavy boots stomping down the hall, just a few soft creaks on the porch steps, exactly like the sound I make when I go out to get a package. 3 steps, pause, then the small wooden sigh of weight leaving the boards. Sometimes the screen door would give a tiny squeak, just once, like it was moved a fraction of an inch and left there. The first time I heard it, I froze in bed, holding my breath. Then I told myself it had to be someone walking by on the sidewalk, sound echoing weird, or a raccoon. Something normal, except the pattern kept repeating. Not every night, but often enough that my brain started clocking it. Always around the same time, right around when that motion light liked to flick on. One Friday, I forced myself to go check. I told myself I'd feel stupid if I didn't. I slid out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat we keep in the corner. Because this is still America, and if you hear someone on your porch at night, you don't automatically think ghost. You think idiot trying car doors. And eased my bedroom door open. The hallway was dark. I walked through that cold patch like always, shivering a little. Hand tight on the bat. In the living room, the faint streetlight glow came through the curtains, enough to see shapes. The house was quiet. I stepped to the front door and listened. Nothing. No creak, no voice, no footsteps. I opened the door anyway. The porch was empty. The night air hit me, carrying that damp leaf smell from the hill. The gravel of our driveway was undisturbed. Across the street, the cemetery sat in its usual shape. Low wall, dark stones, tree branches barely moving. The flowers on the front grave were just visible as a pale blur. As I stepped out, the porch light flickered once, then steadied. The wood under my feet creaked exactly 3 times as I walked to the top of the steps. I waited, like an idiot, for something else to happen. It didn't. When I turned around to go back inside, I noticed something next to the door. There was a small smudge of mud on the threshold, same grayish dirt with tiny bits of gravel as I'd cleaned up in the living room. Only one. No matching print on the porch boards, just that single mark, as if someone had rested a shoe there and then stepped through without touching anything else. I wiped it with my sleeve. I don't know why that felt important. I just didn't want Leah to see it. I didn't sleep much after that. I kept mentally walking through the house, counting doorways and windows, thinking about those moved stones, the neat blue signature on that old form. I thought about the way the woman at the Historical Society had said they moved some stones around, and not the graves. I tried to talk myself down every time. Old house, old hill, bad insulation, weird acoustics. It's amazing what your mind can do with ordinary noises when you're already on edge. A week or so later, Leah left town for a weekend conference. It was just me and the house, and the hill, and the empty space between us. The first night alone, I kept every light on for a while. then felt stupid and turned most of them off. I fell asleep on the couch with the TV on a low volume, some nature documentary murmuring about whales. Sometime during the night, the TV turned off. I woke up to silence, not the comfortable kind, the kind that feels like it's holding its breath. The digital clock on the cable box said 1:19 a.m. The motion light outside flashed on. Its glow edged around the curtain like a thin halo. I stayed very still, heart doing that slow, hard beat in my chest. Through the quiet, I heard the porch steps creak. 3 steps. Then the soft, complaining sound of the screen door moving just a bit. I told myself out loud, "It's a raccoon." My voice sounded small in the room. Then, from down the hallway, from the direction of the cold patch, I heard my name. Not loud, not whispered exactly, just spoken in a normal conversational tone. "Calvin?" It sounded like Leah. The pitch, the rhythm, but she was 3 hours away in a hotel. I sat up, every muscle tight. "Leah?" I called. My voice cracked in the middle. No answer. The air in the house felt suddenly thicker, like it had cooled and warmed at the same time. The wood gave a tiny pop, somewhere above my head. I listened for footsteps and heard none. I didn't go down the hall. I know that makes me sound like a coward, but I just didn't. I sat on the couch until the motion light clicked off and the clock said 2 a.m., and eventually I must have dozed off again, because the next thing I remember is morning light leaking around the curtains and a car driving by too fast. In the daylight, it all sounded dramatic in my head. I told myself I'd dreamed that voice. It's easy to fool yourself like that when the sun's out and there are garbage trucks and kids on bikes going past. Before Leah came back on Sunday, I went across the street. I don't know what I thought I was going to accomplish. The grass was damp, but not soaked. The air smelled like wet stone. I walked through the gap in the brick wall. Gravel crunched under my shoes on the path, and a crow called from somewhere higher up the hill. When I stepped into the back half, the noise from the street dropped away. Even the insects were quiet. I ended up at that cement bench, the one that faces the single grave. I'd never really looked at that stone closely before. It's newer than the others, not shiny new, but newer. Mid-1900s maybe. The lettering is still clear. The last name was the same as on the 2 older graves at the front. The dates said the person buried there had died in the 1950s. Under the name and dates, someone had paid for a line to be carved. Beloved husband and father, called home. I had the thought, totally uninvited, that maybe he'd been the one who'd signed that form for the house if he'd lived long enough. Maybe the names ran in the family, shifted slightly each generation. Maybe people had always been moving back and forth across this hill, above and below the ground. Standing there, I became very aware that there was nothing between the back of our house and the back of this hill except air and dirt. No alley, no other buildings, just a slope and whatever was under it. A breeze came through and moved just the nearest branches. The rest of the trees stayed still. I watched as a single brown leaf scraped its way across the top of the stone and fell to the ground. A chipmunk chattered from somewhere, then stopped abruptly, like someone cut off the sound. I didn't stay much longer. On the way out, my eye caught the front pair of graves again. Fresh flowers, bright and clean, no petals on the ground. That night, Leah told me about her conference over takeout, and I didn't mention any of it. The house felt slightly less heavy with another person in it. Still, I caught her glancing at the front window more than once. So that's where things are now. Nothing big has happened. No doors slamming, no apparitions. Just small patterns that line up in ways I can't quite untangle. The motion light still comes on some nights around 1:20. The porch still creaks 3 times when nobody's there. Sometimes, from down the hallway, I hear what sounds like 2 voices having a quiet conversation. One that sounds a lot like mine, and another I can't place, only to find the house empty when I check. I stopped walking through the cemetery on my way home. I take the longer route now, around the block. It adds maybe 2 minutes to my commute. Not a big change, but it feels like drawing a line. Leah thinks I'm just trying to reach my step count. I still don't have a good explanation. Maybe it's all just drafts and bad wiring, and a mind that notices too much when it's tired. That's what I tell myself when I'm sitting at my desk at the clinic, coding procedures while the fluorescent lights hum above me. But every evening when I park in the driveway and step out onto the gravel, I look up at the hill just for a second. And no matter what time it is, no matter what the weather's like, no matter if it rained all day or snowed or the wind was strong enough to knock over trash cans, the same thing is always true. The flowers on that grave are always fresh. My name is Marcus, and I'm from Red Wing, Minnesota. I've lived here most of my life, off and on. It's one of those river towns that people drive through, on their way to somewhere else, with old brick buildings, a decent bakery, and way more churches than seems necessary. I moved back a couple years ago, after a breakup in the cities. Cheaper rent, quieter streets, and my parents are only 15 minutes away if anything goes really wrong. Right now, I share a small rental house with my cousin Tyler, who moved up here for a job at the plant. The place is nothing special. 1 story, peeling white paint, big maple tree out front, porch that leans just enough that you notice it when you set a drink down. The only thing that makes it unusual is what's across the road. Directly opposite our house, taking up almost the whole block, there's this small Victorian-era cemetery. It's boxed in by an old iron fence that leans here and there, with little spear tops bent in different directions. Near the front, by the gate, it's actually pretty neat. The grass is cut, the older stones are straightened as best they can be, and someone put in a gravel path that crunches under your shoes when you walk it. Farther back, though, it gets tangled. Grass overtakes some of the stones. Ivy climbs up the ones near the trees, and a few headstones have sunk at weird angles, so they look like teeth. There's a single metal bench facing one particular grave near the middle, and there's a little cluster of stones near the back, where, if you look close, a lot of the death dates are the same year. I'm a data analyst for an insurance company, which sounds more impressive than it is. I work from home most days, sitting at the cheap dining table with my laptop, spreadsheets open, headphones in. My schedule is pretty predictable. Up around 7, coffee, quick check of emails, then hours of staring at numbers until everything blurs together. Around lunch, I usually step out on the porch to stretch my legs. It's quiet most weekdays. You hear an occasional truck on the main road, a dog barking somewhere, sometimes a distant train horn if the wind is right. And the cemetery just sits there, across that narrow street, like part of the background. Tyler works swing shifts, so we're kind of ships passing most of the time. When our schedules overlap, we end up in the living room with some game on, arguing about stupid things. He jokes about the cemetery more than I do. He calls it our backyard audience. If we sit on the porch at night, he'll raise his beer and say, "Evening, folks," toward the iron fence. It never bothered me much. Honestly, at first, I liked it. No loud neighbors across from us, no apartment complex, just stones, trees, and birds hopping around in summer. The town itself is old enough that nobody gets too excited about graveyards. There are a few scattered around, churchyards, little family plots. This one's just one of the older ones. They say it stopped being used sometime in the 1930s, except for a couple family burials in the front section. There's a small brick church 2 blocks away, and I think they technically own it. I never really checked. It was just there, part of the view. Most evenings followed the same pattern. I'd close my laptop around 5, my eyes aching, and stand up to stretch. Maybe I'd hear the radiator knock a little, or the wood creak in the hallway when the house settled. If Tyler was home, there'd be the sound of the shower running, or him swearing at something on his phone. I'd flip on the porch light, which has that annoying habit of flickering for a few seconds before it decides to stay on. Then I'd step outside, listen to the gravel under my sneakers, and just breathe for a minute. Across the street, the iron gate would be closed, the last of the daylight catching the tops of the stones, crows squabbling in the maple behind our house. Normal. The first time something felt a little off, it was easy to brush away. It was late September, one of those nights where the temperature drops faster than you expect once the sun is gone. I'd gone out around 9 to take some trash to the bin around the side of the house. The air smelled like dry leaves and cold dirt. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and then stopped. When I came back around the front, I noticed the cemetery gate was open. Not wide, just a foot or so, like somebody had slipped through and hadn't pulled it shut. I remember Pa always complaining about kids cutting through places like that, so I just assumed some teenager had used it as a shortcut. The wind was kicking up, pushing dry leaves along the pavement, making the iron fence rattle a little. It fit. I mentioned it to Tyler when I came back in. "Gates open across the street," I said, dropping onto the couch. He looked up from his phone. "Probably old Mrs. Larson. She walks her dog through there sometimes. Right?" "I've never seen her actually go in," I said, "just along the sidewalk." "Yeah, well, maybe she felt brave today." He smirked. "Or one of your spreadsheet ghosts got bored." I rolled my eyes. It was nothing. That's what I told myself. Garbage picked up, gate happened to be open. End of story. A couple days later, I was walking back from the little convenience store down the street, plastic bag of milk and cereal in my hand. It was late afternoon, that weird flat light you get in fall, where everything looks like a faded photograph. As I came up our street, I saw a splash of color in the cemetery that didn't really fit with the usual browns and grays. On the grave that the bench faced, the one in the middle, there was a bunch of flowers, not old silk ones or faded plastic. These were fresh, bright, mixed colors, stems still green, tied together with a simple piece of twine. Somebody had stuck them in a glass jar pressed into the soil. That grave is old. I'd read it once when I was bored on the porch. Late 1800s. The name didn't mean anything to me. Some family I'd never heard of. Nobody had been out there earlier, I was sure. I'd been at the table all morning, facing the window. You can see the front half of the cemetery from where I sit. I would have noticed somebody crossing the street and going in. It's not a big deal, I know. People can come by when I happen to be in the bathroom or looking at my screen, but I remember standing on the sidewalk, the bag handles cutting into my fingers a little, looking at those flowers and thinking, that's weird. Not creepy. Just something that didn't quite line up in my head. That night the wind picked up. You could hear it pushing against the sides of the house, making the maple branches scrape lightly against the roof. The porch light flickered more than usual, buzzing softly. Somewhere, far off, a train horn sounded and then faded. I was brushing my teeth when Tyler knocked on the bathroom door. "Hey," he said, a little quieter than normal. "Did you, go over there earlier?" I opened the door with the toothbrush still in my mouth. "Over where?" "The cemetery." He jerked his thumb toward the front. "You put flowers on that grave in the middle?" I frowned and shook my head, talking around the toothpaste. "No. Saw them when I came back from the store." "Why?" He hesitated. "It's just, I was watching the game most of the afternoon. I mean, I got up for food and stuff, but I never saw anybody out there. Not like crossing the street, not going in, nothing." "Yeah, well," I said, spitting into the sink. "You miss stuff. You watch football like it's a religion." He snorted, but he didn't laugh. "I guess. He scratched the back of his neck. They look fresh though, like today fresh. Probably some relative, I said. Or one of those historical society people. They're always doing something with old graves. He nodded, but again, there was this pause, like his brain didn't quite buy it. Maybe. Then he shrugged it off and went back down the hall. Little things like that kept happening over the next few weeks. The gate would be standing open in the morning, closed by late afternoon, without either of us seeing anyone go in or out. The motion light over our driveway would click on when the road was empty, glaring straight across at the iron fence like it had seen something move. One night, sitting on the porch around 10, we both heard the crunch of gravel from inside the cemetery, steady and slow, like someone walking. But when we both leaned forward and stared, the path closest to the gate was empty. Probably a raccoon, Tyler said after a second. On gravel? I asked. He shrugged. Fat raccoon. I laughed then. It was easier. You don't want to be the one who takes things too seriously. Around that time, I started going for short walks after dinner, just around the block to clear my head from work. The neighborhood is mostly older houses, some fixed up, some leaning a little like ours. People keep to themselves. You hear television through thin walls, smell someone's cooking, that kind of thing. I'd usually circle the cemetery once, my shoes clicking on the cracked sidewalk. Up close, the iron fence looks worse. Rust has eaten through parts near the ground. Some of the bars wobble when you tap them. On cooler evenings, you can hear them ticking softly as they adjust to the temperature. The air near the cemetery always seemed a little colder to me, but I chalked that up to open space and shade from the old trees. One night, I stopped at the gate and looked in. The sky was clear, and you could see a few bright stars even with the streetlights. The wind had died down, so it was very still. I could hear insects in the grass, that soft, high chirping. The gravel path lay pale under the porch light across the street. My eyes drifted to that central grave, the one with the bench facing it. The flowers were still there, though they'd started to droop. The name on the stone was worn, but still legible. I don't know why I felt this little urge right then, but I pulled my phone out and took a picture. Just one. I told myself I might look up the name later, see if there was some town history about it. I didn't end up searching that night, but I did glance at the photo in bed. The picture was ordinary. Stone, flowers, bench, a tree branch in the corner of the frame. I scrolled away and went to sleep. A few days later, after one of my grocery runs, I stopped at the little hardware store downtown to grab some light bulbs and a new extension cord. It's one of those places that smells like fertilizer and old wood. Behind the counter, the same man is there almost every time. Gray hair, beard, name tag that says Dale. While he rang me up, I mentioned the cemetery without thinking too hard about it. You know that little one on Maple? I asked. Dale looked up. Across from the white rental with the leaning porch? Yeah, that's us, I said. You know much about it? He made a face like he'd bitten into something sour, but tried to cover it with a polite smile. Old city plot. We don't use it anymore. I figured, I said. Just curious. There's this one grave someone keeps leaving fresh flowers on. Middle section. Bench in front of it. His hand paused for a second as he slid my bulbs into the bag. Almost nothing. Just a hitch. People get sentimental about old names, he said. His tone was flat. History folks, or some family connection. Yeah, I said. We don't see anyone actually go in there. That's all. He stapled the receipt to the bag and pushed it toward me. If you start watching anything too long, you'll notice things you don't like, he said. Then he gave a little chuckle that didn't sound amused. Best to let the dead have their space, huh? It was such a typical small-town line that I didn't push. I just nodded and left. But the pause stayed in my head during the walk home. As October rolled in, things felt off. Not dramatically, just slightly skewed. The insects that usually made noise near the cemetery would sometimes go completely silent when I stepped onto the porch at night, as if someone had hit mute on the world. Then, after a few seconds, they'd start up again, like they realized nothing had changed. The porch light flickered more often, buzzing a little louder. One Tuesday night, after a long day of meetings, I stepped out for air around 8. The sky was low and gray, with a kind of thin drizzle that left everything damp but never turned into proper rain. I leaned on the porch railing, feeling the cool, wet wood under my palms. Across the street, I noticed something odd. The gate was open again, just a bit, but that wasn't what caught me. The gravel path had a trail of darker patches, like something had been tracked along it. Mud or wet leaves, I wasn't sure. The path led straight from the gate down the center, past the bench. It stopped just beyond the central grave. I squinted, trying to see footprints, but it was too dim. The porch light hummed overhead. Somewhere down the block, a dog gave one sharp bark and then went quiet. The hair on my arms lifted a little, which I blamed on the chill. Tyler came up behind me, screen door creaking sluggishly as he pushed it open. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, "just looking." I pointed. "Somebody went in there, or something." He peered out. "Don't see anybody." "Not now," I said. "Just the path. Looks like it's been used." He shrugged. "Dirt and rain, it all kind of looks the same," he said. But he didn't stay outside. He went back in pretty quick, letting the door slam a little harder than usual. The next afternoon, on my walk, I cut around the block and ended up by the cemetery again. The drizzle had stopped. The gravel looked normal. When I got close to the gate, though, I realized there were faint impressions along the path. You know how wet gravel holds the shape of a footprint just a little, flattening where the weight was? It was like that. The shapes weren't clear enough to tell size or anything, but they were in a line, evenly spaced, leading toward the central grave. I glanced up at our house. From the front window, you could see the top half of the gate and the area near the bench. If someone had been watching, they would have seen whoever made those marks. But I hadn't been watching, not at that exact time. The flowers on the central grave had been replaced. New ones again. Different mix of colors. No jar this time, just the stems stuck straight into the soil. That night, I had trouble focusing on my spreadsheets. Numbers swam in front of me, turning into dates, then back into values. I kept catching myself staring out the window, like I expected to see something standing by the fence. Nothing was there. Just the fence, the trees, the vague outline of stones. Around 11, I gave up and closed the laptop. Tyler was on a late shift, so the house was quiet except for the tick of the old clock in the hallway and the occasional distant car on the main road. I made tea, more for the routine than the taste, and sat at the table facing the window. At some point, without noticing, I must have dozed off right there in the chair. I woke up because I heard gravel crunch. Not loud, just one or two slow steps. My neck ached from the awkward angle, and my right hand was numb from where it had been pressed under my thigh. The lights inside were off, except for the glow from the stove clock. Outside, the porch light still burned, casting its cone of yellow across the road onto the iron fence. It was hard to tell what time it was without my phone, but the sky looked dark enough to be deep night. I sat perfectly still, listening. The insects were silent. No cars, no dogs, no train horn. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and my own heartbeat picking up. Then I heard it again. Crunch. A pause. Crunch, slow, measured, like someone taking careful steps on the gravel path. I told myself it was a cat, or a raccoon, or branches shifting in the wind. Except I couldn't hear any wind. The tree outside our window wasn't moving. I stood up, my chair legs scraping softly against the floor, and moved closer to the window. From that angle, I could only see the front strip of the cemetery, the gate, a bit of the path. The bench ghosted in silhouette. Nothing moved. The crunching had stopped. The world was very, very quiet. I stayed there longer than I cared to admit, just watching. My tea had gone cold by the time I finally turned away. When I glanced at the stove clock, it said 2:13 a.m. The next morning, I decided I was being ridiculous. I walked over to the cemetery entrance in full daylight. Sun low, but bright. Air sharp with that dry autumn smell. The gate was closed. The gravel path looked like any other walkway. Kids laughed somewhere up the block on their way to school. A truck rumbled past behind me. I stood there with my hands in my jacket pockets, feeling stupid, and then my eyes landed on the flowers again. Fresh, very fresh. Drops of water still clung to the petals, even though it hadn't rained overnight. Curiosity finally pushed past whatever politeness I had about graves. I checked for anyone watching, then unlatched the gate. It squeaked softly, a familiar sound, and swung inward. The gravel felt strange under my shoes, like I was crossing some unspoken line. I walked up the path, passing stones with names I didn't recognize. Some leaned, some were chipped. That cluster in the back with the same year on multiple stones caught my eye again. 1918 on 3 in a row. I thought of flu epidemics from history class. It made objective sense. At the central grave, I stopped. The bench faced it like always. The flowers were stuck in the earth in a neat little bundle. I knelt down a bit to read the inscription more clearly. The name on the stone was a woman's. I won't say it here. The dates put her death in the early 1900s. Below the name was a faint line of text that time had almost erased. I could barely make out beloved sister, and the rest had worn smooth. My eyes dropped to the base of the stone. Somebody had scratched something there more recently, shallow lines in the softer part. At first, I thought it was vandalism, but when I leaned closer, I saw my own last name. Not my first, just the last, same spelling. It's not an especially rare name, but it's not the most common either. Seeing it there threw me for a second. I touched the letters with my fingers, feeling the roughness. "Everything okay over there?" The voice made me jump. I turned and saw an older woman on the sidewalk. I recognized her vaguely from around the neighborhood. She usually walked a small dog past our house. Today she was alone, holding a grocery bag. "Yeah," I said. "Just reading." She nodded, but her eyes flicked from me to the grave and back. "You renting that place across the street?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, "with my cousin." She pressed her lips together for a second. "That house used to belong to that family," she said, nodding toward the stone. "A long time ago." "Oh," I said. "I didn't know that." "Most don't," she said. "It changes hands a lot." She seemed to realize how that sounded and gave a small shrug. "Old houses, too much work." "Right," I said. "Do you know who brings these?" I gestured at the flowers. Her gaze lingered on them, then on me. "Those graves aren't what you think they are," she said quietly. Then she shifted the bag in her arms. "Anyway, have a good day." Before I could ask what that meant, she'd already turned the corner and disappeared between parked cars. On the walk back to the house, leaves scraped gently along the street in little clusters. A crow cawed from a rooftop, sharp and annoyed. I tried to tell myself the conversation was just typical small-town weirdness, the way older people sometimes talk in half phrases. But the line stuck with me. Those graves aren't what you think they are. That night, Tyler got home around midnight. I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone, unable to sleep, when I heard the front door open and close, the rustle of his jacket, the soft clunk of his boots hitting the mat. Then his voice. "Dude," he called, "you awake?" "Yeah," I said. "What's up?" He stepped into my doorway, hair flattened from his cap, circles under his eyes. "You mess with the hallway?" he asked. I frowned. "What?" "The hallway," he said. "There's dirt all over it, like muddy footprints." I swung my legs out of bed and followed him. The wooden floor creaked under our weight, the house making those old house sounds it always does at night. When we hit the hallway, he flicked on the light. He was right. There were smudges on the floor, dark and irregular, tracking from the front door down the hall toward the kitchen. Not perfect footprints, just dragged marks and partial shapes, but clearly dirty. The smell of damp earth was faint, but there. "Maybe I tracked something in earlier," I said automatically. "From the yard." "I checked your shoes," he said. "You left them by the door. They're dry." "Then you did it," I said. He shook his head. "I came in the side door from the driveway. I checked my boots. They're clean." We both went quiet. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Somewhere outside, a car passed, its headlights sliding briefly over the ceiling. I forced a laugh. "Maybe the house just decided to grow its own dirt," I said. "Seriously, it's an old place." He didn't laugh back. He kept looking at the marks. "It kind of looks like," he began, then stopped. "Like what?" I asked. He swallowed. "Like somebody walked in from the front door, stood in the hall for a bit, then went toward the kitchen." He pointed with his chin. "But the door was locked when I got here. I had to use my key." We cleaned it up. It wasn't hard. Damp towel, some cleaner, a little scrubbing. The marks came up, though the faint smell hung around longer than I liked. We didn't talk much while we did it. After he went to bed, I checked the front door. It was still locked. Chain latched, deadbolt turned. I peeked through the narrow window next to it. The porch light shone on the empty street. Across the way, the cemetery gate stood slightly ajar again, just a dark line in the metal. I locked the door again, even though it was already locked. Things settled into a pattern after that. Not every night. That would have been easier to explain in some ways. Instead, it was every few nights, always slightly different. Once I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with the strong feeling that someone had just walked past my bedroom door, the faintest whisper of boards shifting. Even though when I got up, the hallway was empty. Another time, Tyler swore he heard me in the kitchen making coffee at 2 a.m. He heard the cupboard open, the mugs clink. When he got up to ask what I was doing, the lights were off and I was asleep in my room. I started keeping small mental notes, not anything written down, just patterns in my head. The muddy marks in the hallway appeared again twice. Always faint, always easy enough to scrub away. The porch light started clicking on by itself more often, even when there were no cars, no people, nothing. I changed the bulb. It still did it. Outside, the flowers on the central grave never seemed to wilt the way they should have. I paid attention then. I'd see red ones one week, white and yellow the next, sometimes a simple bundle of wildflowers. I never saw a jar or vase, just stems in the earth. No matter how much I watched, I never saw anyone place them there. One Saturday, Tyler was out and I had the place to myself. It was late afternoon, low sun slanting through the front window, dust motes drifting in the light. I was sorting through some old boxes in the small back room, half storage, half office. The room had this faint, closed-in smell. Old paper, wood, a hint of stale cologne from whoever lived there before us. At the bottom of one box, under some tangled extension cords and a broken picture frame, I found a slim manila folder. It wasn't ours. The previous tenant must have forgotten it. Inside were photocopies of old property records. The address on the top matched our house. Out of habit, more than curiosity, I started skimming. Names, dates, sale prices. Halfway down the second page, my eyes caught on a line. It listed the earlier owner's name. The last name matched the stone in the cemetery. Same spelling. Under that, in parentheses, was a short note. Family plot directly opposite on Maple. Okay, that tracked with what the dog-walking neighbor had said. House used to belong to that family. No big mystery. I kept reading. A later notation near the bottom of the page, from the 1970s, mentioned dispute over remaining interments and records incomplete. I don't know why that stuck with me. Maybe it was the phrase remaining interments. It made my brain itch a little. I flipped to the last page, and there it was. A list of names with check marks and a faded stamp that said recorded. One of the names was crossed out with a single line. In the margin, in tiny handwriting, someone had written unknown status. The crossed out name was the same as the one on the central grave. The one with the bench. For a while, I just sat there on the floor, folder open on my knees, listening to the house creak. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang the hour. 4 slow, measured tones. I told myself things get messy with old records all the time. People moved bodies, or thought they did. Papers got lost, damaged. Unknown status could mean anything. It didn't have to mean what my brain tried to make it mean. That night, I kept the hallway light on. Tyler didn't comment. He just stepped around me on his way to bed, patting my shoulder once, like we were both silently agreeing not to talk about any of it. I wish I could say there was some big dramatic moment after that, but there really wasn't. It was all small shifts. I started closing my bedroom door all the way at night, instead of leaving it a crack open. I caught myself listening for the crunch of gravel even when my headphones were on. Tyler stopped joking about our audience across the street. If we sat on the porch, he'd look everywhere but at the cemetery. One evening, a little before Halloween, I was on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching the last bit of light fade. The air smelled like wood smoke from somewhere up the hill. Kids' voices drifted from a couple blocks away. The insects had already gone quiet for the season. It was one of those moments where you feel between things, day and night, warm and cold. The gate across the street was closed. The bench was just a shape in the dim. I could barely make out the central grave. And then, for no good reason, I said out loud, "If this is your place, you can have it. We're just passing through." My voice sounded small, swallowed up by the open space. Nothing answered, obviously. The porch light buzzed once and steadied. A car rolled past at the far end of the block, turning away. I went inside, locked the door without really thinking about it, and tried to get some work done before bed. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and headed down the hall. As I passed the front window, I glanced out. The flowers on the central grave were new again, bright against the dark, standing up straight, like they'd just been placed. We hadn't heard a car. The motion light hadn't clicked on. The gate, as far as I could see, was shut. I stood there for a long time, my hand on the light switch, the faint smell of damp earth drifting through the old window frame, feeling this tight, quiet understanding settle in. Whoever those flowers were for, whoever still crossed that gravel, I didn't really want to know more than I already did. We still live here, at least for now. I go to work, I pay my bills, I talk to my parents on Sundays. Tyler and I still argue about nothing in the living room. Life goes on. The house creaks, the radiator knocks, the screen door sticks when it rains. I don't walk through the cemetery anymore, though. I stay on our side of the street. I keep the gate in the corner of my eye and pretend I'm not doing it. When I wake up in the middle of the night and hear a soft shift in the hallway, I tell myself it's just the house settling. I don't check. And every morning when I open the curtains, I can see that one central grave from our front window. No matter the weather, no matter the season, the flowers on that grave are always fresh. My name is Miles, and I'm from Stillwater, Minnesota. Most people only know Stillwater because of the river and the old lift bridge, or the antique shops tourists wander through on weekends. I live a little off the main drag, on a quieter street that doesn't end in anything special, just a modest Victorian-era cemetery across the road and then some woods beyond that. It sounds dramatic when I say it like that, but to me, it's just where I live. You get used to anything if you see it every day. I work from home as a data analyst for an insurance company, which is way less exciting than it sounds, if it ever sounded exciting at all. It's a lot of spreadsheets, dashboards, and emails from managers asking, "Can we get this by EOD?" I sit at a cheap desk in the front room, laptop angled so I can see out the window. From there, I see our front yard, the street, and the cemetery gates. That view kind of became my version of office chatter. I'd watch dog walkers, joggers, the occasional funeral procession moving slowly up the gravel path. I don't live alone. My cousin Hannah moved in with me about a year ago when she got a job at the hospital over in town. She works odd shifts as a respiratory therapist, so she comes and goes at strange hours. We grew up together, but hadn't lived under the same roof since high school. When she texted that she needed a place and didn't want to sign a full lease yet, I offered the spare room. She helps with rent, and we split groceries, and sometimes we sit on the porch with beer or tea and just talk about nothing. The house itself is nothing fancy, just a 2-story place that's older than both of us put together. You can tell from the way the floors creak and the radiators knock when they warm up. There's a screened porch in front with this old wooden swing that came with the house. The screen door never closes right on the first try. You always have to give it a little hip bump. Our street light is just far enough away that the front yard always looks dim, and my porch light has this annoying flicker no one's managed to fix. The electrician said the wiring is fine. Some fixtures just do that, he told me. Across the street, the cemetery sits behind a black iron fence that's tall enough to feel like a boundary, but open enough that you see everything inside. It's not huge, not one of those sprawling places. Just a modest rectangle, going back farther than it looks at first, because the ground slopes up a little. Near the gate, things are pretty neat. Gravestones stand in mostly straight rows, grass trimmed, some new flowers every now and then. But if you walk back toward the trees, it starts to get messy. The ground dips and rises. The grass grows higher. Vines creep around a few stones. It's like whoever maintains it only worries about what you can see from the road. There's this broken angel statue midway in, leaning against a stone that's cracked along the top. The angel's head is missing, and one wing is snapped. I noticed it the first week I moved in. It kind of became my marker for the middle of the place. Farther back, near the rear fence where the trees thicken, there's one grave that always caught my eye. I mean, after you stare at something long enough, you find favorites, right? This one has a simple headstone, older than most, with a little flat area at the base. There are always flowers there, not fancy bouquet stuff, just fresh cut flowers. Sometimes in a plastic cup, sometimes in a little jar. Once, it was just a bunch of wildflowers tied together with a piece of twine. At first, I didn't think about it much. Small town, old cemetery, people visit. That's normal. The town itself is quiet most nights. You hear a few cars on the main road, distant train horns now and then, a dog barking down the block. In summer, you hear insects buzzing around the streetlights, this steady hum that fades into the background. In winter, it's just wind. You know how the wind sounds different when it blows through trees instead of around houses? It's softer, but it feels bigger somehow, like there's more space inside the sound. Most evenings, after logging off for the day, I'd heat something up, talk to Hannah if she was home, and maybe sit on the porch swing for a bit. She didn't mind the cemetery at all. First week she was here, she smirked at it and said, "Guess we don't have to worry about noisy neighbors." Later, she'd joke about it more. If the wind rattled the fence, she'd say, "The residents are restless tonight." Or if the porch light flickered, "Okay, which one of you just walked by?" It stayed like that for a while. Just normal life with a weird but peaceful view. The first things that felt even a little off were small enough that I almost feel guilty calling them disturbances. It was more like tiny glitches. One Saturday morning, I was out front raking leaves. It was one of those cool fall days where you can see your breath a little, but you're still comfortable in a hoodie. I heard the iron gate of the cemetery squeak open, that distinct metal sound that carries more than you expect. I looked up out of habit. No one was there. The gate was slightly open, not all the way, just a foot or so. I figured someone had gone in and I just missed them. Maybe they walked around the big oak, out of my line of sight. A minute later, I heard the gate creak again, like it eased back a little. When I looked up, it was closed. Not slammed, just gently shut. I told myself it was the wind. We had a decent breeze that day, and older hinges squeak at nothing. I went back to raking. A few days later, late afternoon, I was finishing up a report. I noticed movement in my peripheral vision, out the window. The motion sensor light by our driveway kicked on. It shines mostly on our side yard and a little onto the street. Usually that means a car, a raccoon, something. I glanced out. Nothing. No car, no person, no animal. Just the cemetery gate, closed, iron bars casting long lines across the gravel path. I got up, walked to the front door, and leaned out onto the porch. Screen door creaked. The air was colder than I expected. I stood there a minute, listening. I could hear leaves scraping across pavement, the faint sound of a TV from a neighbor's open window, distant traffic, no footsteps, no rustling. The motion light stayed on, then clicked off again. That night, I mentioned it to Hannah. Probably a squirrel, she said, or the wind. Those sensors are touchy. Yeah, I said. Just felt weird. You're watching that place too much, she said, nodding toward the cemetery. You stare at anything long enough, it's going to start to seem like it's staring back. She laughed after she said it, just a quick little laugh, and went back to scrolling her phone. Another time, on a Tuesday, I think, I walked across the street on my lunch break, just to get my legs moving. I cut through the gate and followed the gravel path, listening to it crunch under my shoes. The air smelled like wet grass, and that faint metallic tang from the fence. Up close, you notice more small things. Dates worn down, lichens spreading over names, little lambs carved on children's stones. I drifted toward the back, where the grass isn't mowed as often. That's when I noticed the flowers on that one grave again. Old headstone, dates from the late 1800s. I remember that because I'd read them a bunch of times, trying to picture what life even looked like back then. Right then, at that moment, there was a small bunch of white flowers, some kind of daisy, I think. Fresh. Drops of water on the petals, like they'd just been rinsed or picked in the rain. I looked around, expecting to see someone. There was no one, no cars parked nearby. I hadn't seen anyone on the street when I stepped out. Still, it wasn't impossible. Maybe they came from the side, through the trees. Maybe I just didn't notice. When I got home that evening, I mentioned the flowers to Hannah. People go visit, she said, shrugging. Just because you don't see them doesn't mean they're not there. Yeah, I know, I said. It's just, they're always fresh, every time I look. She grinned. Maybe they've got Amazon Prime for dead people now. We joked, and it seemed small enough to let go. Over the next few weeks, those little things repeated. The gate would be cracked open in the morning and closed by noon, when no one seemed to have gone through. The motion light would kick on late at night, even when I didn't hear a car. Once, I woke up around 2 a.m. because the house felt colder than usual. The radiators were quiet. I went downstairs to check the thermostat. On my way past the front window, I glanced out and saw the cemetery path faintly lit by the streetlight. The gate was open just a few inches. I told myself, again, that it was the wind. I told myself a lot of things. The shift from kind of weird to I can't explain that easily started on a Sunday. Hannah had the day off. We'd gone to the grocery store in the morning and were just kind of hanging around the house. It was one of those heavy, overcast days where you feel like it might rain, but it never quite commits. The air was still, no wind, no insects. I was on the porch swing with a mug of coffee, just watching nothing in particular. Hannah came out, sat down next to me, pulled her cardigan tighter. "Doesn't it feel off?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "I don't know, too quiet." We sat there in silence for a minute, listening. No cars, no dogs, no kids. The only sound was the faint ticking of our porch light, that little electrical noise you don't notice until you're listening for something else. Then we both heard it, a soft crunch of gravel, not loud, just 1 or 2 steps. We both looked toward the cemetery. The gate was closed, the path beyond looked empty. "Probably a squirrel," I said automatically. "In gravel?" she said. We listened again. Nothing. Just that strange, heavy quiet. "Whatever," she said after a second. "I'm making grilled cheese. You want one?" "Sure," I said, and forced myself to stand up and go inside like it was nothing. That night, laying in bed, I thought I heard it again. A slow, single crunch, like a footstep on gravel. 7 or 8 seconds later, another. At first, I thought it was my imagination replaying the sound from earlier. I get in my head like that. Then I realized I could hear my own house too clearly. The wood settling, the faint hum of the fridge, some pipe ticking somewhere. Normally, all that background noise blends together. Now it felt like my ears were picking everything apart, trying to detect one sound in a pile of others. I told myself, again, it was nothing. Maybe a neighbor walking their dog on the far sidewalk. I eventually fell asleep. The next odd thing felt more personal. One afternoon, I was between meetings and decided to walk across the street again. The office chatter in my group chat was annoying me, and I needed air. The wind was picking up, pushing the tree branches against each other with that dry, rustling sound. As I walked through the gate, I put my hand on the iron bar. It felt colder than it should have, almost wet. I moved toward the back, to that same grave with the constant flowers. There was a new arrangement there. Yellow chrysanthemums this time, trimmed neatly. No leaves, stems cut even. A little glass jar held water that hadn't gone cloudy yet. I checked the dates again, even though I knew them. Died 1893. No last name that meant anything to me. Not local names I recognized from town businesses or anything. On the way back to the gate, I stopped by the broken angel statue. The stone she leaned on had no visible name anymore, just a blur. I put my hand on the angel's shoulder for balance and felt something rough under my palm. A chip of stone came loose. It startled me, like I'd broken something fragile. I looked down. The chip was small, gray, nothing special. I heard a faint whisper then, just a breath of sound that could have been wind curling around the statue. It sounded a little like my name, or maybe it didn't. Honestly, if you're looking for a pattern, you can find your name in anything. That's what I told myself. That's what I kept telling myself. When I stepped back out through the gate, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Hannah. "Are you home?" she texted. "Yeah, outside," I wrote back. "Thought I heard you come in," she replied. Door creaked. I looked at our house. The front door was closed. I hadn't touched it. Later, sitting at the kitchen table, I brought it up. "You didn't open the door?" she asked. "No," I said. "I was in the cemetery." "Must have been the wind," she said, but her voice sounded less sure this time. "Door creaking from the wind, yeah," I said. "Makes sense." "Yeah," she said, but she kept her eyes on the table. Around that time, I started to feel like there was a pattern. The gate moved more often. The motion light flicked on with no visible cause. The air in the front hall would sometimes feel cooler than the rest of the house, like someone had just opened the door even when it was shut. I'd walk through and smell damp earth for a second, that specific smell you get after it rains and you dig into the soil. It would be gone when I tried to breathe it in again. I didn't jump straight to anything supernatural. If anything, I went the other way. I checked the door frame to see if the weather stripping was bad. I asked the electric company about fluctuations. I even looked up whether motion sensors could be triggered by bugs flying too close. I found an article saying spiders sometimes set them off. I liked that explanation. Spiders made more sense than ghosts. One afternoon, I walked down to a little historical society office a few blocks away. It's in this cramped brick building with old photos of the town on the walls and that dry paper smell that always makes my allergies flare up. There was an older woman at the desk, glasses on a chain, the whole thing. I asked if they had records on the cemetery. She hesitated just a moment before answering. "Which one?" she said. "The one on Maple, across from my place," I said. "Oh," she said, "the old one." She got up, went into a back room, and came out with a binder and a thin folder. We sat at a small table with a squeaky chair. "Not everything's digital yet," she said. "We're working on it." The binder had a few maps, rough hand-drawn layouts of plots, names, dates, all crammed together. The folder had photocopies of older documents, some handwritten notes from who knows when. I tried to find the grave with the constant flowers. I knew the location relative to the gate and the broken angel. I found a spot on the map that seemed right, with a name that matched the stone. There wasn't much detail, just a surname, 2 dates, and a small note that was too faint to read fully. Something like "moved from," and then the rest was smudged. "Do you know who, looks after that grave?" I asked. "Someone keeps leaving flowers." The woman pursed her lips. "Some families still come by," she said. "Others don't. Hard to keep track." "This one seems like, I don't know, regular," I said. "Every few days, at least." She looked at me a little too long, like she was considering how much to say. "Some folks have routines," she said finally. "Traditions. You don't see them, but they're there." "Do you know who?" I asked. She shook her head. "If you're curious, best not to be," she said, and then pretended to misplace the folder so she could get up and walk away for a second. When she came back, the conversation had shifted to something else. I left feeling like she knew more than she wanted to say, but maybe that's just how older people are when they think you're being nosy about the past. The first time I noticed something had crossed from over there to over here, it was raining. It wasn't a storm, just a steady drizzle that had been going on most of the day, making the sky this flat gray. The kind of rain that seeps into everything. Hannah was on a night shift, so it was just me in the house. The radiators were ticking. The TV was on low in the background. I'd made pasta and eaten half of it on the couch. Around 9, I got up to put my bowl in the sink. As I walked through the front hall, I felt it again. That cold spot right by the door. Colder than the rest of the house, like I'd stepped into air that had just come off the river in November. I put my hand on the doorframe. It felt damp, which didn't make sense. There were no drafts, no visible leaks. I opened the door to check the porch. The screen door creaked and bumped weakly in the wind. The porch floorboards were shiny with moisture. Outside, the street was slick and dark. The cemetery gate was closed. The path glistened with wet gravel. Then I looked down. Right in front of me, on the inside of the threshold, were 2 faint, muddy prints. Not shoe prints exactly. More like where wet, dirty soles had pressed down and then smudged as they moved on. 1 step inside, then nothing. No trail leading deeper into the house. Just those 2 partial marks, side by side, like whoever made them had stepped in, and then vanished. I stood there for a long time, staring. My first thought was that Hannah must have come home earlier, but her car was gone and the house had been quiet. Even if she had, you'd see more prints. 2 steps don't get you far in our hallway. I grabbed a paper towel and wiped them up. The dirt came away easily. No dramatic stain, nothing weird, just mud and water. I told myself the delivery guy must have done it. Maybe a package I hadn't noticed. I checked the porch, There was no package. I tried to call Hannah, but she was busy. She texted later, saying, "Sorry, crazy night, what's up?" "Nothing," I wrote back. "Never mind." After that, the house started to feel different at night. It wasn't big things, just a sense that the front hallway was a little colder than it should be, even when the heat was on. Sometimes I'd be in the kitchen and hear the floor creak in the hall, like someone had walked from the door to the bottom of the stairs. I'd go look, and there'd be no one there. Once, around midnight, I heard the screen door ease open and then bump softly as it closed. Just once. No footsteps on the porch, no knock. I checked the porch, then the yard, then across the street. The cemetery gate was slightly ajar. I started locking the deadbolt more carefully, checking it twice before bed. I don't know why. If anything, that made me feel worse, like I was admitting something was wrong. Hannah noticed I was jumpier. "You okay?" she asked one morning as she poured coffee. "Yeah," I said. "Just not sleeping great." "Is it the graveyard?" she asked. "Because if you're freaking yourself out, we can always put up a taller fence or plant hedges or something." "It's not the graveyard," I said, and I realized I wasn't lying. That part, the view, the stones, the fence, I was used to that. It was the space between the gate and my door that bothered me. That stretch of street and sidewalk that used to feel like a clear line. A few nights later, I was half dozing on the couch when I heard Hannah's voice from upstairs. It sounded like she was saying my name, just once, in that slightly annoyed way she uses when I don't answer right away. I sat up. "Yeah?" I called. No response. "Hannah?" I stood, my joints popping a little, and started up the stairs. The house was quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the fridge and the wind brushing against the siding outside. The light from the hallway cast a pale rectangle on the landing. Her bedroom door was partly open. I knocked on the frame. "You call me?" I asked, pushing it open a little more. Her bed was made. The room was empty. The bedside lamp was off. I checked my phone. She'd texted an hour earlier, heading in for the night shift now. There was a timestamp and the little "delivered" tag. I stood there for a while, listening. After a moment, I realized the house felt perfectly normal again, not especially cold or warm, just the right temperature. That almost bothered me more. The next day, I told myself I'd been dreaming and had gotten confused, mixing up an old memory of her calling my name with the sound of the house settling. You can talk yourself into anything if you try hard enough. The thing that finally cut through that was stupidly simple. A piece of paper. I was going through some old mail on the kitchen table, making a pile of things to shred. There were old bank statements, utility bills, some insurance forms. At the bottom of the stack, I found a thin manila envelope I didn't recognize. No return address, just my name and the house number in neat handwriting. The postmark was smudged. I must have tossed it on the pile without thinking weeks earlier. Inside was a photocopy, like someone had put an old document on a scanner and hit print. It was a record from the city somewhere about property transfers from decades ago. I saw my address, written in that precise, old-fashioned script. Next to it, there was a list of names. Owners, I guess. People who'd lived in the house before. Most of them meant nothing to me. Then I saw a name that made me pause. Same last name as the one on the grave with the constant flowers. First name different, but the last name matched, and the dates lined up with the general era. There was a small note in the margin, hard to read. Something like "plot moved," followed by numbers. While I was scanning the page, my eyes landed on something else. In a section that looked like it listed residents, or maybe occupants, the name Miles appeared once. Not my last name, my first. The handwriting made the letters look strange, but it was there. Miles, written in ink that had bled a little into the paper. I don't know why that rattled me as much as it did. Miles isn't an exotic name. There are plenty of us, but it felt like the word was staring back at me. I blinked, looked away for a second, and when I looked back, I couldn't find it. I traced the lines with my finger, reread each one, and the specific miles I thought I'd seen wasn't there anymore. The letters blurred together. I told myself I'd misread something like Miller or Miles or whatever. Old handwriting is tricky. That's all. Still, I kept the paper out. I didn't want to put it back in the envelope. That evening, I asked Hannah if she remembered bringing in that envelope. "I don't think so," she said. "I dumped the mail in a pile, you know that." "Maybe the Historical Society mailed it," I said, after I asked about the cemetery. "Maybe," she said. "Did you ask for copies?" "Not really," I said. She shrugged. "Maybe you just don't remember you did. You've been stressed." I wanted that to be true, so I let it be. The last thing I'll tell you about happened a few nights later. I say last because it's the point where I stopped trying to make sense of it and started just living with it. It was around 11. Hannah was off, already asleep upstairs. I was on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket, holding a mug of tea that had gone lukewarm. The night was clear and unusually still. No insects, no wind, nothing. It felt like the whole street was holding its breath. The porch light flickered a little, then steadied. Across the street, the cemetery lay in its usual darkness, the iron fence a black line against the dim sky. The gate was closed. I could see the outline of the big trees, their branches like a mess of veins. I heard it then, that familiar, soft crunch of gravel. One step, then another, slow. I leaned forward a little, hand on the edge of the swing. I squinted, trying to see past the gate. From where I was sitting, I could just make out the start of the path, the first few stones. No movement, no shape. The crunch came again. Closer this time, not on the cemetery side. On the street, on the sidewalk. The motion sensor light by the driveway blinked on, then off. Like something had passed right at the edge of its range. The air on the porch cooled, enough that I could see the faintest bit of my breath. I smelled damp soil, like after rain, even though the day had been dry. I stayed very still. I don't know why. It felt like if I moved too much, I'd break something delicate. I heard the screen door behind me shift just slightly, as if pressure had changed. The wood floor under my feet creaked once, even though I hadn't moved. I didn't see anything. No shadow, no figure, nothing walking up to the house. But I heard one more soft sound, like a footstep just inside the front hall. Not heavy, just enough to make the boards complain under a little weight. My first instinct was to stand up, go inside, turn on every light, call out for Hannah, check the locks again. Instead, I just sat there, fingers wrapped too tightly around the mug, listening. After a moment, the house went quiet again. The air in the hallway felt normal when I finally stepped inside. The radiator gave a little knock, like it was catching its breath. The porch light flickered and then held steady. Before I went to bed, I did something I still don't completely understand. I walked to the kitchen, opened a cabinet, and pulled out a small glass jar. I filled it halfway with water. Then I went to the dining table, where that photocopy still lay, and set the jar down next to it. The next morning, when I left for a walk, I glanced across the street. The flowers on that one grave, those yellow chrysanthemums, looked fresher than they had the day before, like they'd just been placed. I don't go to the Historical Society anymore. I stopped asking the woman there questions. I stopped trying to line up dates and names. I still hear the gravel sometimes at night, slow and deliberate, like someone walking a path they know by heart. I still feel that cold spot by the front door now and then. I don't have an explanation that makes sense to me, and I'm tired of forcing one. I lock the door every night, but I don't kid myself that it changes anything. I sit on the porch swing, and I try not to stare too long at the iron fence, or the broken angel, or the shadows in the back half of the cemetery. I tell myself it's all coincidence. I tell myself people have routines I just don't see. I tell myself the wind can move things, and sensors misfire, and old houses play tricks on their owners. and every few days, without fail, I look across the street and see that someone has been there again, standing at that same old stone, leaving something bright against the gray. The flowers on that grave are always fresh,